321. Li Huo. The Gryffindor common room was almost empty. Most of the students had gone to Professor Lupin's defense against the dark arts class on the Patronus charm, leaving the great room to one occupant. In the best seat by the fire, a recliner was occupied by a boy who slept peacefully, his short, curly black hair a little tousled and his long lashes fluttering now and then. His face had not yet fully matured, but the first hints of an elegant handsomeness were already visible. A strange, large, silver-white book rested on his chest. Its cover bore a small portrait of a mysterious wizard with graying hair and eyes that seemed to glow a silvery light. If anyone met that painted gaze, it felt as if the portrait might blink and draw them into a world of uncanny magic. The fire crackled and spat in the hearth, sending warm waves of heat across the room. The boy smiled unconsciously as the warmth washed over him and the faint silver light on the book dimmed. Loren slowly opened his eyes. "Tulip tree resin, full moon dew," he murmured, remembering the proportions he had just worked out from the strange book. He checked the dosages for several key ingredients and let out a relaxed sigh. Because the book's internal environment and ingredients could be freely adjusted, and with the experience he'd gained brewing the Rafflesia last month, he'd shortened the time needed to determine dosages. He only had to wait until mid-month to brew the leopard skin flower variation of the wolfsbane potion. Professor Lupin was no longer in mortal danger. That went smoother than I expected. Thank Merlin, he thought. He glanced at the clock, still 8:45, so Lupin's class wouldn't be out for a little while. He watched the flames leaping like red hydrangeas and let his mind wander. The common room was quiet. Hermione still isn't back, he thought, turning over another question that had been nagging him for days. The nature of the dark arts and their effect on the soul. Were dark spells corrupting the caster's soul as they were practiced, or only when used on others? What separated the unforgivable curses from the gray area curses? He picked up his wand and examined it closely. The applewood was a grayish-brown, darkened by oiling and slow drying. Under the firelight, the grain showed clearly, a steady, even beauty. He remembered Mr. Ollivander's words. Applewood was suitable for dueling. A phoenix feather core could unleash extraordinary potential. Phoenix feather cores were said to be impartial, while unicorn hair tended toward purity. Harder for a witch or wizard with a unicorn hair core to use dark arts. Yet Ron, Malfoy, Neville, Cedric, Lupin, even Quirrell, those he knew who had unicorn hair cores, didn't seem especially averse to darker magic. So where did the truth lie? Sectum Sempra is dark art. What about the bat bogey hex? Loren murmured. A log in the fireplace cracked, and a plume of soot darkened the brick. Loren brightened. An idea for exploring a dark spell had come to him. He touched the strange book with a fingertip, and the silver light flashed in his eyes and in the portrait's eyes. Sleep closed over him again. Flamel in the virtual library frowned as the boy suddenly appeared before him. "Haven't you finished brewing that potion? What are you doing back here?" he asked in a tone of mild disgust. Loren looked up with bright eyes. "Professor, I want to learn the Fiendfire curse." Fiendfire? Flamel's first instinct was to refuse, but then he paused and grew thoughtful. As Loren's personal professor, he'd taken a gentler approach when he realized this boy would have a very long future and plenty of time to learn. No pushing, no harshness, just steady teaching and the occasional indulgence in Muggle art. Loren was a model student, talent, intelligence, and excellent grades. But recently, Flamel had been troubled. At first, he had thought it a simple case of a Dementor stone, but the boy had discovered a magical power hidden in his own soul and had become obsessed with probing the nature of the soul. Now he wanted to explore the dark arts because of it. Was this something a third year should even be attempting? If Flamel refused to teach him, would Loren simply teach himself out in the wider world, where his talent would make that too easy? And the scariest thought, given Loren's ability, he might actually be able to summon Fiendfire. The question was whether he could control it. Fiendfire burned everything and nearly never went out of its own accord. Flamel feared one morning Albus might wake to find Hogwarts, preserved for centuries, reduced to ash. Still, the virtual environment of the strange book was exactly the sort of place to practice something so dangerous. Furthermore, Fiendfire was different from the Unforgivables. It was not necessarily categorized as evil in the same way. Flamel fell silent, then waved his sleeve and changed the scene to a dueling chamber. He nodded to Loren. First, I'll explain the theory behind Fiendfire. Loren had expected an argument. He was surprised that Flamel was so reasonable. Fiendfire means demonic fire, Flamel said solemnly. It belongs to the summoning branch of Transfiguration. Its origins are lost in antiquity, and its power is deeply rooted. Wait, Loren interrupted. Fiendfire is Transfiguration? Many are surprised. Flamel spread his hands. Formally, yes. Fiendfire is a summoning spell within Transfiguration. That means the casting difficulty is not the highest. An ungraduated student can, in theory, cast it. But, he added, looking directly at Loren, even Durmstrang, famous for tolerating dark arts, would not teach students this spell lightly. As the old wizards say, it's easy to start a fire, but hard to put it out. A gray-white wand appeared in Flamel's hand. He tapped its tip against the palm of his other hand, and a streamer of flame flowed from the point. A crimson blaze swept across the dueling chamber, so bright it left a brief dark after-image on the eyes. The heat warped the air. Even from a distance, Loren felt the wave. Flamel cut the flame and held the burning ball in his palm, then blew gently. The fire surged and took monstrous shape. A vast Hebridean black dragon formed from living flame, its wings rimmed with skull patterns, and the membranes between bones a swirling inferno. The dragon's maw opened. The fiery throat compressed the air, and a distorted, mournful roar filled the room as columns of fire spewed forth. Flamel's virtual form hovered aside. Once summoned, the caster's wand pours out an unending, increasingly powerful magical fire. As you wave the wand, the flames can imitate the shapes of various beasts, hunting down almost any combustible object without discrimination, friend or foe. Only when every last combustible thing has been consumed, not even a splinter of wood left, will the flames die. Historically, Fiendfire has wiped out whole wizarding families. Although it can be forced out with powerful counterspells or general dispelling charms, it remains a deep taboo. He landed beside Loren and spoke in a low voice. Unless you are absolutely certain of what you're doing, do not summon Fiendfire in the real world. Within the virtual dueling chamber, the fiery sea boiled and towered, crimson crests racing and crashing with unstoppable force. Back in Gryffindor Tower, time passed until there was still some evening left. The torches in the corridor lit the path as Hermione squeezed through the portrait hole and entered the common room. The fire was bright, and she immediately spotted Loren on the recliner. He was breathing evenly, but his brow was furrowed, and for some reason, Hermione always thought he looked better asleep. She smiled and reached out to smooth his crease. The moment her fair, tender finger touched his brow, Loren opened his eyes. Hermione saw a flicker of flame-like light in his pupils. "You're back," Loren said, brushing her hand away and peering at her as if she were distant. He waved his hand in front of her face. "What's the matter with you?" "Oh, I'm back," Hermione replied, studying the unusual light in his eyes, then glancing at the fireplace. The flames looked different somehow. "What did you talk about with Professor this time? Human survival or wizarding development?" Loren interlaced his fingers with hers, enjoying the softness and the warm pliancy of the skin between her knuckles. She blushed and pulled her hand back. "When did you get so brazen?" She scolded lightly and gave his forehead a playful smack. "Professor Babbling called for me. I finished the basic numerology of ancient runes, and she was expanding my studies." "Just talking. Why hit me?" Loren rubbed his brow. "I was helping you relax, and you attacked me." He offered her his hand. "Then you can massage me." Hermione looked like she was about to give him a good, hard rub when the portrait hole opened again, and a stream of students returned, chattering excitedly about the Patronuses they'd seen that evening. Professor Lupin's Patronus was the coolest. Professor Flitwick's glow lit up the entire Great Hall. Professor McGonagall can produce 3 Patronuses at once. Isn't that Transfiguration? The corridor buzzed with exuberant, overlapping voices. Among them, Ron and Neville helped a pale Harry to the fireplace and laid him on a recliner. Loren and Hermione both looked over. Harry seemed hollowed out, his eyes unfocused and dim. Ron sank into a chair and panted while Neville explained. Professor Lupin had Harry face a boggart that turned into a Dementor. Harry didn't keep his distance. He got too close, and then he stopped, but Loren and Hermione needed no more to know what had happened. Harry's double vulnerability to Dementors was well known. In the Great Hall, in front of everyone, he had been overwhelmed. He covered his face with both hands, near tears. "I could almost get a Patronus glow," he said miserably. "I just wanted to get a little closer to show the charm's power." Ginny came up then, cheeks flushed, clutching a box of chocolate frogs. "Harry, I brought some chocolates. Do you want one?" she asked. Harry relaxed a fraction and managed, "Thank you, Ginny." She handed him a frog with a nervous little smile, fidgeting with her robe and searching for something more to say. "Harry, is the Patronus charm difficult? Professor Lupin said he doesn't recommend younger students try it." "It's okay. I think you could try it," Harry muttered. Ask me, ask me." Ron leaned forward eagerly. "Professor Lupin said I learned faster than Harry." Harry gave a wobbly nod. "Yeah, Dementors affect Ron less." Ginny rolled her eyes at that and continued to pester Harry with questions about technique. Hermione watched the three of them with a thoughtful expression, then drifted over to Loren and murmured something in his ear. Loren put up a finger and shushed her, a knowing smile tugging at his mouth. Hermione returned the smile, an exchange full of its own private meaning. Late that night in the girls' dormitory, Hermione lay on her four-poster bed with her eyes closed and her lids fluttering as her pupils darted beneath them. She dreamed of a strange, vast space, a colossal library without lights on the dome but inexplicably bright, its shelves endless and crammed with books of charms, potions, transfiguration, herbology, rare runes, even natural sciences, humanities, drama, and music. For Hermione, it was perfection. Her lips curved into a smile as she turned over and sank into a deeper, more beautiful dream. 322. Library in Dreams. Early morning. The distant chirping of birds outside the castle, filtered through the dormitory window to the sleeping little wizards, softened to a faint, lingering echo, like the gentle breath of a kitten nudging everyone awake. Hermione's eyelashes fluttered, and her clear, watery eyes opened. Her gaze passed through the black drapes of the four-poster to the pale, cold sky beyond. She frowned prettily and snuggled deeper into her quilt. She suddenly sat up, realizing with a start that she'd been behaving like a bit of a lazybones. On a sudden impulse, she gathered herself and climbed out of bed. She wrestled with her unruly hair in front of the mirror. The neatly lit room behind her was doubled in the glass, giving the space a strange, thoughtful depth that made Hermione momentarily absent-minded. Her mind drifted to the dreams she'd been having for 2 nights in a row. A bright, impossibly large library filled with endless shelves. In the dream, she had picked up a copy of Ancient Runes, translation and revision examples. It was an older textbook, different from the one used in class, more complete with extra entries. Unlike the vague impressions dreams usually leave, she could still remember some of the book's content with surprising clarity. She could recall a cream-colored page where, in the bottom right corner, a passage had been written. The 9-headed Hydra is used to represent the numeral 9, but it is not merely 9, because when one of the Hydra's heads is cut off, 2 more grow in its place. So in runes, the number 9 often signifies infinity. She could even picture the handwriting and the small page number beneath it. Professor Babbling's lessons had never mentioned such a thing. Had Loren said something in passing that she'd missed? Or had her subconscious simply connected the Hydra's regenerative nature with the number 9 and produced the association in a dream? Dreams were slippery like that, half memory, half invention. Muggle scientists even credited dreams with insights before. Mendeleev imagined the periodic table in a dream. Kekulé saw a snake of carbon atoms and later drew benzene upon waking. She paused with the wooden comb at the ends of her hair, looking at her reflection. The girl in the glass wore a puzzled expression, as if asking herself, what exactly was that dream, and was any of it real? Monday arrived, and the week's bustle resumed with elective classes. Dropping Muggle studies had given Hermione more time. She no longer had to dash between 3 distant classrooms in a single hour, but Monday always felt busy. In the Great Hall, the students had finished breakfast and were leaving their tables in 2s and 3s for their first lessons. "Hermione, did you stay up late again last night?" Loren asked, inspecting her face as if checking for dark circles. You look a bit distracted. Hermione blinked and collected herself. I'm off to ancient runes first. We can talk during divination. She grabbed her bag and hurried down the corridor. Another girl suddenly darted out from behind a tapestry, grabbed Loren's arm, and dragged him toward the North Tower. Loren glanced after Hermione with a confused question mark on his face. Hermione arrived for her first class holding her Ancient Runes textbook. Professor Babbling was already there, bedecked in an elegant autumnal robe that suited her more like a costume than an academic gown. She carried herself with a charm distinct from McGonagall's stately authority, more like a hostess at the Three Broomsticks than a strict scholar. The professor spotted Hermione and offered a bright smile. Good morning, Hermione. Good morning, Professor, Hermione replied. Little Hermione, Professor Babbling said, her smile widening. Would you help me collect the students' essays? Hermione froze, surprised. When had she become Professor Babbling's assistant? She had been asked to report on teaching progress, give feedback, and even the previous weekend to help grade homework. After a moment's silence, Hermione accepted. Students trickled in and handed their essays to her. By the time the lesson began, her desk held a thick stack that served as a makeshift lectern beside the professor. Regarding rune numerals, Professor Babbling began, we covered the basics last month. While teaching numbers, we also touched on many fantastic beasts and their symbolic meanings in runes and some cultural extensions. But do not assume you have mastered their significance yet. Her quill paused. Then Hermione heard the familiar line. Professor Babbling explaining, runes are a profound and obscure system. They weave Latin phonetics with hidden hieroglyphic symbolism. Take the number 9. It is not only a quantity, but often an indefinite concept, hinting at infinity. This is connected to the characteristics of the nine-headed Hydra. The scratch of the pen on paper stopped in Hermione's hand. She looked up and stared at the professor on the stage. For the first time that term, she felt an odd urge to fall asleep in class. Professor Babbling went on, you will encounter this knowledge more as you progress. It is still premature for you now. The divination classroom sat in the North Tower. The route there required climbing a dozen flights of stairs, but third years had mapped every step, and so the ascent had become dully familiar. More entertaining was the night portrait along the corridor, whose frame usually displayed only a plump, gray dappled horse casually grazing. If a student leaned in to tease it with a finger, a knight in armor would leap out, draw his sword, and denounce the intruder, charging until he inevitably fell over halfway. If someone were genuinely lost and asked for help, however, he would climb down and lead them on an imaginary expedition. Since the discovery of that portrait, every divination lesson became an excuse for the kids to play at being gallant adventurers while the knight gamely clattered along. Forward march, noble sirs and graceful ladies, forward! The clang of armor and the children's laughter echoed through the tower as Hermione, holding Loren's hand, walked among the crowd with an unusually serious expression. Quietly, as if speaking a secret, she asked him, Loren, have you ever heard of a library in dreams? A library in a dream. Loren's expression shifted. He thought for a moment, then said with meaning, my dream doesn't just have a library. There's a potion room, a dueling chamber, and an alchemy lab, too. Hermione stared at him for a few seconds, then softened. I'm sorry, Loren. I misjudged you before. I thought you were a lazy, unmotivated student who just wanted to sleep all day. Loren, who prided himself on being diligent, couldn't let that pass. He gave her a playful little punch. That's slander. I'll have to report you. Hermione laughed, caught his fist, and pinned it down. I'm sorry, but if you ask me, you were the one joking with me first. What joke? I'm serious. All right, serious. Hermione took a breath and pressed her lips together. I'm serious too. I dreamed of a library with no lights, but it was bright anyway, and there were endless shelves. As Hermione described her dream in careful detail, Loren became even more convinced she'd somehow entered the fantastic book. He remembered asking Flamel, the book's resident, whether he could bring others into the dream. Flamel had answered ambiguously, Loren, this is your dream. Everything depends on you. Loren ran through recent memories, searching for what might have let Hermione in. Even recalling the moment he'd activated the book outside the divination classroom in the North Tower didn't give him an answer. Do you think it's some kind of Hogwarts magic, like the Room of Requirement, that clever students can stumble into the library? Hermione tilted her head, eyes bright with speculation. Possibly, Loren nodded. So, Miss Granger, would you like to be a guest in my dream? What do you mean? Hermione flushed. She thought he was teasing. Who would want to go into your dream? Loren chuckled. You might not have a choice. Don't dream about me. They laughed together as they walked into the divination classroom. Well, tea room, depending on how you wanted to call it. The room was sealed tight, curtains drawn, lampshades swathed in dark red cloth. A hazy scarlet light filled the space. An incendio blazed in the fireplace, a large copper kettle steaming on top, sending out a sharp, cloying spice scent. Most of the students wrinkled their noses and took their seats like they were suffering, faces pinched. Parvati and Lavender were the exception. They idolized Professor Trelawney and had happily been spending lunches in the tower lately. No one knew what they talked about with Trelawney, but they always returned with solemn, knowing expressions. Seeing Parvati and Lavender go over to the professor before class, Ron leaned in and complained, "Spare me. I don't know when misfortune is going to strike me in their prophecies, but if they'd just stop looking at me like that, I'd even drop the class." People snickered. Whenever Parvati and Lavender whispered, they tended to turn and stare at Ron with odd, wide eyes, and Professor Trelawney's first prediction for Parvati had been that she should stay away from him. Ron was half convinced they thought he wouldn't live long. Harry, blamed by some as another likely death omen recipient, laughed loudest and clapped Ron on the shoulder. Think about it. If you drop divination, what would you pick instead? Ancient runes or arithmancy? Oh, don't, Ron sighed. I've seen Hermione's arithmancy homework. All those dense numbers and weird symbols. There must be curses in there. My head hurts just looking at them. I think arithmancy would suit you, Loren said with a smile. Spare me. Late that night, light rain tapped at the window. Loren tucked himself beneath a fluffy quilt, the fantastic book open in his hands. He grinned at the book's icon. He'd already decided whether someone ended up in the dream wasn't up to them. Meeting Hermione there would be a huge surprise. Inside the fantastic book's bright library, Flamel looked up from a volume on modern opera theory as Loren entered. Why aren't you in the dueling room practicing fiendfire? What are you doing in the library? A look of dawning realization crossed Flamel's face. I understand. Beginners like you want to set things on fire. The library will rebuild itself if it burns, but that's not a habit to encourage. He paused. Besides, you still can't cast fiendfire properly. All you get is choking black smoke. That's nonsense. Loren waved him off. I'm not here to burn anything. I'm waiting for someone. Flamel's interest peaked. Waiting for someone? Loren began to tell him about Hermione. Meanwhile, in the Gryffindor girls' dormitory, a few of the girls were sitting around after washing their hair. Though they could dry it with magic, they still sat together out of habit, combing each other's locks and talking. Parvati carefully worked a comb through Hermione's hair, then glanced at Lavender. Weasley's all right, really, but compared to his friends, well, I'm not saying he's bad. Harry's just so much more. She dragged the tease out, looping an arm around Hermione's shoulders and grinning. And then there's Loren Morgan, Hermione squealed, partly embarrassment, partly amusement, and playfully smacked Parvati. I don't have time to think about Ron right now. Lavender sighed, fretting. Professor Trelawney's prediction for October 16th is coming up. I've been uneasy. I even have awful dreams. Like what? Hermione and Parvati asked. Lavender waved her hands helplessly. All sorts. Dementors, boggarts, banshees, dragons, even a basilisk. Don't worry, Hermione said quickly. Even if all that turned up at once, Dumbledore wouldn't need to step in. McGonagall and Flitwick could handle it. Lavender relaxed a little and, emboldened, turned conspiratorial eyes on Hermione. You're close to them. Do you know if Ron likes anyone? Hermione smiled. No, I don't think so. And besides, haven't you had your reading with Professor Trelawney? I still think he's meant to be mine, Lavender declared. The night deepened. The girls talked and laughed until the moon slid across the sky, from handsome boys in Quidditch to homework and classes, staying up far later than they should. Back in the fantastic book, Flamel closed the opera volume, looked up at Loren, who'd been waiting patiently, and suggested, "How about you go practice Fiendfire?" Breakfast in the Great Hall. Loren sat at the Gryffindor table, half an apple in his hand, staring down at the white flesh. For him, biting into a cold apple in this season felt as daunting as learning the Patronus charm. He sighed. Hermione, seated next to him, yawned and rubbed her eyes. "How long are you going to stare at that thing?" she asked. When Loren looked up, he noticed the faint dark circles under her eyes. "Did you stay up late again last night?" he asked. "Yes?" Hermione's voice had the soft, exhausted lilt of someone who'd been up too long. "Parvati and Lavender kept me up, asking me questions about, well, love stuff. I had to write home to Mum to ask what to do." She sighed at the memory of the ridiculous questions, a helpless expression crossing her face. No wonder she hadn't been ready for him. She'd been held up. Loren muttered the words, staying up late, frustration curling in his chest. He bit a big chunk from the apple with an almost ferocious crunch. Hermione, oblivious, took a sip of milk and said, "By the way, I didn't dream of the library again last night. It's such a shame. I wonder if I'll ever get to go back." The apple's juice slid down Loren's throat as he chewed. As Hermione had said, she never re-entered that dream library, and Loren's hoped-for dream date seemed to have evaporated. He'd asked Flamel about it, but gotten no answers. The trigger that had allowed Hermione into the fantastical book remained a mystery. Autumn deepened. Cold and gray took over the sky, and clear, bright days became rare, a welcome interruption between long stretches of overcast weather. Rain clouds lingered, ready to unleash an unexpected shower. Mornings could open with a fine drizzle, classrooms brighten mid-lesson with sudden sun, then the afternoon might end with a drenching downpour. When sunlight broke through, Professor Flitwick would smile, and the younger students would giggle. If it was Professor McGonagall, they were more restrained. When rain fell during free time, the courtyard filled with drenched, laughing students who either fled for cover or threw themselves into puddles, trying to drag as many friends with them as possible. Quidditch practice in the evenings was miserable when it rained, cold and wet, and the players always returned shivering, reluctant to do homework. "So that's why you copied your homework in third year?" someone teased in the Gryffindor common room. Loren, back from brewing a potion in the room of requirement, had just been cornered by Harry, who wanted help with all his assignments. "I wanted to do it myself," Harry said with a chuckle, "but Wood wants us to practice more this weekend, and I've got to learn the Patronus charm from Professor Lupin. No time left for homework." Fred and George wandered over, overhearing. "Exactly," they shouted in unison. "It's Wood's fault." George flung an arm around Harry's shoulders. "Sometimes life's just full of things you can't help." Fred draped a hand over Loren's shoulder. "Even brilliant people like us have to make sacrifices for Quidditch," he called to the girls nearby. "Right, Angelina?" Angelina rolled her eyes. "So you two copying my homework is a sacrifice? I hadn't realized." Laughter bubbled around the common room. Oliver Wood patted over and mock-tapped the twins on the head. "When I leave next year, we'll see which captain will tolerate you two. Don't worry. After Halloween, during recruitment, I'll find proper beaters, and then—" He pretended to think of what to do with Fred and George, and Ron, rising from a game of wizard's chess, barked, "Kick those pests off the team." Fred and George went over to lecture Ron teasingly, and the room filled with noise. Loren explained his messy handwriting to Harry when a small procession of girls came in through the portrait hole, looking gloomy. Lavender buried her face in Parvati's shoulder, shoulders shaking as if she'd been crying. Hermione came in at the back, her face glum and annoyed, and bumped Loren's shoulder as she sat down. "Today's the 16th of October, she said. Professor Trelawney predicted Lavender would suffer her worst fear. "What happened?" Loren asked. "Lavender got a letter from home. Binky, her pet rabbit, was killed by a fox. We went to see Trelawney together." Hermione's jaw tightened, and Trelawney tried to play it off like she'd foreseen it. She said she warned Lavender and blamed her for not being prepared. She even said it was fate and the future couldn't be changed. Hermione looked indignant, angry, but not threatening. Harry, pausing in his homework, glanced up, wide-eyed. "Does that mean Trelawney can actually see the future?" Does it mean I'm really going to have an omen of death? No, Hermione snapped. She just stumbled on something. Binky was a baby rabbit. Lavender never thought Binky would die. Trelawney's so vague she can always make it look like she was right. Loren considered this and then nodded. She's good at using ambiguous language. Remember last term's prediction about 13 people dining? Hermione continued, certain. Her predictions are guesses wrapped in vague wording. No matter the outcome, she can claim credit. But what about my omen? Harry asked. Hermione frowned and answered slowly, weighing possibilities. She said you'd have an ominous sign, but she didn't say what. It could be anything. Choking on a chop at dinner, tripping during practice, or maybe you've already had it. Think. Harry looked puzzled. Huh? The night we flew out of school on the Hippogriff, Hermione said quickly. You met a Dementor and fell off Buckbeak. That was an omen. She stopped mid-thought, surprised at herself. She had been trying to show Trelawney up as a fraud, yet now she'd inadvertently proved one of her predictions. The contradictions in Trelawney's true predictions versus her theatrical manner left Hermione baffled. She looked at Loren, bewildered. Some of Trelawney's things did happen, but when you examine her grand pronouncements, Neville's grandmother, Parvati and the red-haired man, Lavender's fear, they're phrased so broadly it's hard to trust them. Loren spoke calmly. They're language tricks, disguises. I could predict something Ron expects after Halloween, and if it came true, I'd claim to be a seer. He bumped Hermione's shoulder supportively. Hermione opened her mouth to argue and then stopped, the golden chain around her neck jingling faintly. She touched the small timepiece she wore at her collar and pursed her lips. After a beat, she said, I dropped divination. The weekend passed quietly. Loren made good progress on his modification of the Wolfsbane potion and continued steady practice with the Fiendfire curse. Except for Hermione consoling Lavender and Parvati, there were no other dramas. When the bell rang at the end of class, Professor McGonagall reminded the students about the notice on the bulletin board. This is your first Hogsmeade weekend, she said. Those who haven't handed in their permission forms should do so before Halloween. She reiterated the rules and cautions of visiting Hogsmeade, especially the need for parental permission, and took questions patiently. Neville had to hunt for his permission slip inside a textbook, but most of the class were ready. Harry had already had Sirius sign his. On the way to lunch, everyone buzzed about what they'd do first in Hogsmeade. Hermione had a question for McGonagall and lingered behind. Loren waited near the classroom door. When she came out, she looked lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. The golden hourglass she'd worn around her neck was gone. You dropped divination? Loren asked, tilting his head. Yes, Hermione said, smiling. McGonagall said I should have done it sooner. She said transfiguration needs rigor and discipline. Divination just wasn't right for me. Hermione's face showed the relief of someone who'd made the right choice. She skipped down the stairs, humming a tune. Loren dug out a box of finger biscuits and munched loudly, habit, nervousness, and appetite mixed on his face. Why are you eating biscuits now? It's almost lunchtime, Hermione said, puzzled. Loren didn't answer at first. He offered her a small biscuit. Unthinking and in good spirits, she opened her mouth and something cold was placed on her tongue. Her melody stopped. Hermione blinked and then smacked her lips. Mandrake? Loren nodded, pleased. Since you're not using the time turner anymore, why don't you practice the animagus ritual with me? He said cheerfully. Hermione stared at him for a moment. She pointed to the great hall ahead, then to her own mouth, as if to confirm. Exactly, Loren said, grinning. It's almost lunchtime. I didn't want you to spoil your appetite. Loren Morgan, Hermione scolded. You're welcome. It's what I should do. 325. Boggart's Secret. It was the weekend, and the room of requirement had taken the shape of an office in Snape's style. In the dim, eerie candlelight, oil lamps and sconces along the walls flickered occasionally, while the cauldron on the desk gurgled steadily. The Wolfsbane potion simmered, but Loren's attention was fixed on a small walnut box sitting on the desk, the black cloth that had covered it lying beside it. He sat forward, fingers tracing the cool, slightly rough wood. The box trembled as if whatever was inside sensed the gaze through the grain. A gray, herbal smoke magic, like the veiled mist one had seen in Professor Trelawney's classroom, wafted from the cracks, coating the wood in a hazy pallor. The mist tried to creep up his fingers, but was too weak to pass his second knuckle. From class, he knew what that meant. The boggart inside had no definite shape yet. It didn't know what Loren feared. Loren blinked. The room's candlelight reflected in his eyes, and the world simplified into harsh, black and white outlines. He tried to glean the boggart's form through the essence of its magic, but there was nothing distinct. He couldn't tell whether the gray was the boggart's magic or its true shape. Tapping his brow, he let his occlumency fall back into place, and the hazy overlay vanished, blocked by the walnut box. He unfastened the clasps with 2 soft clicks. The trembling boggart suddenly stilled. "It can't break my occlumency, and it can't transform, so it's shy?" Loren murmured, amused. He flicked his wand. A string of sparks struck the lid and forced it a hair's breadth open, only for a violent tug from inside to slam it shut with a crash. "It can still be shy?" he said. No wonder no one had discovered this boggart's true form in years. Occlumency was hardly esoteric magic, and some other clever witch or wizard must have used it to keep boggarts from manifesting. When a boggart could not transform, it hid. Loren's curiosity sharpened. He aimed a small circle with his wand and channeled more will into the box to force it open. The lid quivered and split, then slammed again as a tremendous internal force pushed back. The hinge grated with a metallic screech that made the hairs on his arms rise. He smiled despite the chill. He wanted to see whether the boggart's power would outmatch his own. Just as he prepared to push harder, the gray emanation thinned. The magic leaking from the cracks grew sparse. Loren frowned and withdrew his wand. Facing the quiet walnut box, he thought for a moment. He didn't want to waste too much magic on a single experiment. For now, the prospect of prying the boggart out had to wait. Instead, he opened a different channel with his occlumency, guiding the boggart's gray magic into illusory memories constructed by a false memory charm. The box burst open and a cascade of shapes poured out. A beautiful fairy with rainbow wings that wiggled toward his shoulder but flickered into a white mouse and tumbled away. Crookshanks, Madame Norris, Fang, one animal after another. Then the forms darkened. A redcap, a kappa, a grindalo, Cerberus, Aragog the acromantula, a club-wielding troll, and a basilisk with yellow, terrifying eyes. Each was only a shell, filled with the same gray magic. Loren waved a hand and the basilisk shrank, then watched as the mask slipped. A rotten, glistening hand reached out, and finally a figure in a black robe staggered into being, bringing with it the smell of decay. As he had expected, the boggart only became truly substantial when it assumed the shape of a dementor. Why a dementor? Loren wondered. What did boggarts and dementors share? The chill intensified. Loren flicked his wand and shouted, "Expecto Patronum!" A silvery white glow poured from his wand, wrapping the dementor form and confining it without destroying it. Loren leaned closer to study it. Under the hood of the black cloak was a gaunt, twisted face, skin scabbed and retracted, features nearly lost. A damp, rotten odor hung about it. The dementor's chest heaved with a hollow inhalation, the sound of air drawn through a windpipe that seemed more ritual than respiration. If the Patronus barrier fell, the dementor's magic would start to drain the emotions and memories of the living into itself. What witches and wizards feared most as the dementor's kiss, which would leave only an empty shell. But there was a problem here. Dementors fed on memories and feelings. Boggarts were not biological creatures. What happened when a boggart, which had no real life of its own, assumed a dementor's form and tried to feed? Loren wanted to find out. He kept the Patronus charm in place and pressed the tip of his wand to his temple, drawing out a wisp of silvery light. A false memory he had made up on the spot. His ridiculous, intense love of potatoes, the comfort of mashed potatoes, the crunch of fish and chips. He fed the memory to the dementor. The memory beam drifted like smoke and was inhaled into the thing's body. A faint wash of light and shadow flowed over the dementor. Then Loren's mind wavered. Something tugged at his gaze, an inexplicable pull. Against his will, he sank into it. In his head, the craving for potatoes bloomed, mashed, shredded, battered, fried, while an acrid, burning sensation flared where the silver light touched him. Everything around him felt stiff. Loren's vision blurred. He saw a dimly lit room and a small wizard with black hair and black eyes standing dazed before him. He realized with a shock that he was seeing from the boggart's perspective. The connection startled him, and he tore himself back to his own body, flinging the Dementor boggart back into the box and taking 30 seconds to calm his breathing. The memory he had offered had become a bridge. By transmitting it, he had somehow entered the boggart's consciousness. Had his own mind invaded the creature? Worse, could anyone else do this, or was it unique to him? He suspected the latter. He had long known his soul carried peculiarities, buried memories no one else had. Why had the boggart's transformation into a Dementor produced this strange linkage? Who had created these dark arts creatures, and why did they connect to Dementors? The implications were too dangerous to let rest. Without hesitation, he pulled out the fantastic book and tapped the illustration at its center, waking the old wizard within. When the floating figure appeared, Loren's voice came out urgent. Flammel. The room of requirement smelled of potions and pickled things, shelves lined with glass jars containing snakes and lizards, a copper cauldron that muttered softly, an overall fetid tang in the air. Flammel listened to Loren's recounting with astonishment. Even in centuries of memory, he had never heard of a mind entering a boggart. He peered at the walnut box with sharp eyes and said, "Go find Albus. Have him ensure your safety." Loren blinked at Flammel's solemnity, then nodded and hurried for the headmaster's office, the box tucked under his arm. When he arrived, the desk was cleared of its usual silver apparatus. The box sat quietly on the table with its clasps open and dangling. A dozen principals in the portraits craned forward, clustered into the largest frame to watch. Fawkes perched on a shelf, stretching his neck, his tiny green eyes bright with curiosity. Dumbledore and Loren sat opposite each other, heads propped on their hands, both leaning over the desk watching the box. Loren rubbed at his cold chin and straightened. Dumbledore folded an expression of guilt as if he had been napping. "Forgive me, Loren," he said with a mischievous blink. "I'm getting old. One dozes in winter." Loren rolled his eyes and cut to it. "Headmaster, have you figured anything out?" Dumbledore's pace stayed unhurried. He reached to pry the lid, but it would not budge. Without sensing the fear of those outside, the boggart had sealed itself, refusing to emerge even with the clasps open. Dumbledore considered the clues, then looked up. "Try it again, right here." The portraits murmured in alarm, then fell silent as if some old authority had hushed them. Loren understood the implication. Dumbledore was confident he could protect him. He activated his occlumency, and as before, the box opened at once. A Dementor crawled out. Silver light flared. Dumbledore did not cast a spell so much as wave his hand. A few soft points of silver settled around the Dementor, fixing it in place and keeping its cold contained. Loren drew out the same false potato memory and fed it into the thing. As the memory entered, the tug returned, and Loren's consciousness followed, plunging into the boggart. Within that borrowed mind, he felt the textures and tastes of potatoes, the stench of damp rot, and again the burning sensation that rippled over his skin. He noticed something else. Dumbledore's Patronus felt different from his own, stronger, steadier. Loren knew he could break the link at any time, but for the sake of the experiment he endured and opened his inner eyes. He saw two wizards, one huge, one small. He tried to move to catch Dumbledore's eye, to signal him, but the Patronus light confined him. All he could do was roll his eyes, uncertain if Dumbledore would notice. Reader 26. Talk to Dumbledore. Dumbledore waved his hand, dissolving the faint glow of the Patronus charm, and leaned in with keen interest. His deep blue eyes were full of inquiry. "Can you hear me, Loren?" Although the headmaster was close by, the voice Loren heard seemed distant, hollow, as if coming through a long tunnel. He turned his head from side to side, baffled by the strange sensation. The binding force that had held him was gone, and with it the burning awareness of the Patronus. The scene around him appeared shrouded in an ethereal mist, hazy and indistinct. Sensation returned to his body slowly, stiffness and a lingering chill the first things he noticed. Dumbledore repeated, "Can you hear me, Loren?" Loren focused, flexing muscles that felt slow and unresponsive. He tried to make a sound. When he opened his mouth, only a muffled, breathy exhalation escaped. Rue. Dumbledore paused, considering. Dementors are similar to human bodies in some respects, but they're entirely different creatures, he said. If you can control the body, try other movements first. Loren, still hooded, nodded. He moved his hands, stiff, withered things, downward as if to fly. The next moment, a dizzying vertigo seized him, and then the perception of solid ground returned. He had just emerged from the stagnant, cold shell of the Dementor. The change was astonishing. Warmth and flexibility flooded through him. His hands and feet were no longer rigid. His heartbeat and breathing were strong and clear. His tongue and throat worked normally. His vision sharpened. "I'm out," Loren said, placing the tip of his wand against his temple. He had intended to weave a false memory to slip back into the boggart Dementor's body, but Dumbledore had already fed him a memory, and nothing happened. "Shall I try again, Professor?" Dumbledore held up a hand and smiled gently. "No need. That's enough." Loren brightened. "Principal, have you discovered the secret inside the boggart?" "Not yet." Dumbledore eased the boggart back into its wooden box and clasped the fastenings one by one. "But I can at least confirm it's safe for you. Could you be more specific?" Loren followed the headmaster and sat across the desk. Dumbledore picked up a teapot and, as if asking a small courtesy, looked at Loren. "Orange juice, pumpkin juice, black tea, or something else?" "Pumpkin juice will do." Loren's impatience battled with the headmaster's calm. He felt like Crookshanks and Fang were at war in his chest, yet Dumbledore sipped his tea as if nothing were urgent. With another flick, the liquid in Loren's cup turned into pumpkin juice. "I once studied boggarts," Dumbledore said. "They are unlike many dark creatures that have obvious biological characteristics. These things seem to have appeared without lineage. They don't reproduce. They don't need to eat. Though they can take the shape of a person's fears, they aren't sustained by fear. They resemble Dementors in some ways, yet are altogether different." He set the teapot down. "From their behavior, I believe they're some sort of magical construct. Whatever the creator intended, extending life, preserving memories, or something else, those purposes seem to have failed." Loren sipped his pumpkin juice and asked, puzzled, "Then why can only my consciousness enter the boggart's body?" "Do you know about enchanted portraits?" Dumbledore pointed to the old headmasters lining the wall. As if anticipating their chatter, he flicked his wand and turned them all to face the wall, securing them in that position. "Portraits can carry a part of a wizard's memory, but only if specific methods are used during the painting. Often a painter will mix in blood or ashes or a lock of hair, something that links the portrait to the wizard." Loren's mind started to race. As Dumbledore finished, he realized what the headmaster meant. He pointed at the wooden box, incredulous. "Professor, are you saying that the boggart was linked to me when it was made?" "It's not linked to you directly," Dumbledore corrected. "It was connected to the mysterious wizard who made the boggart, and whatever mark that wizard used for the connection, you happen to share it." "What kind of mark?" Loren asked quickly. Dumbledore's reply was measured, maddeningly vague. It could be hair color, the frequency of magical fluctuation, bloodline, a fragment of soul. Who can say? Loren ran through the possibilities. Bloodline, the Morgans? Soul, the soul of a transmigrator? His head spun. Everything seemed possible, and yet nothing certain. He sighed and slumped back. "Forget it. You said it's safe, so let's leave it for now." Dumbledore smiled and changed the subject. "Last weekend, I went into Hogsmeade to check on things. Activity Week has been delayed long enough, and we must make sure the Dementors near the school have not affected the village." Loren listened as Dumbledore meandered through details until the headmaster finally raised his voice slightly. "Phileas and I were at the Three Broomsticks. He mentioned you." Loren put down his cup and met Dumbledore's gaze. The headmaster's mild smile made his eyes warm and narrow. "Soul, the soul," Dumbledore murmured, sipping his tea with a trace of melancholy. "Frankly, Loren, your progress in exploring magic has outpaced my expectations, faster than many who study ancient magics." Loren downplayed it. "Opportunity and luck. Phileas told me you spoke with him about soul magic. He suggested trying dark arts. He also said he advised you to get my permission, and then heard nothing more, and asked whether I had been teaching you dark arts." Dumbledore adopted a mock-indignant expression. "Poor Phileas believes I must have been the one to teach you, when in truth you never even approached me on the matter." A faint murmur came from the portraits at the wall. an older headmaster's chorus, seemingly amused at the image of their old colleague wearing such a look. Loren reflected a moment. Why had he not gone to Dumbledore? He had recently dealt with Pettigrew and felt it inappropriate to bother the headmaster. And when it came to soul magic, he had suspected Dumbledore and Flamel of being evasive, so he had avoided the topic. He grew busy, and the opportunities slipped away. Professor, dark arts isn't really appropriate. You are the headmaster. Loren said tactfully, let's talk about the soul. Dumbledore smiled, abandoning the teasing. Do you remember what I said? Love is the greatest magic. Rowena Ravenclaw prized wisdom above all. Godric Gryffindor valued courage. The soul is the most enigmatic aspiration of wizards. Even the most wondrous magics cannot reveal its true face. Yet in ancient times there were some who dared to explore it. Dumbledore's expression grew serious. But to this day, no one has fully unveiled the soul's mystery, Loren. Do you know why? Why? Loren asked. Rowena tried to impart her wisdom to her daughter, and the more she tried, the less her daughter understood, and that misunderstanding became a grief lasting 1,000 years. Gryffindor and Slytherin could not see the truths the other held. So many great wizards failed to see what they sought. Pursuing cleverness can lead one away from wisdom. Conquering fear in the name of courage can become merely the hunger for bravery. The more one insists on possessing, the more one loses. A tenderness and sorrow touched Dumbledore's eyes. There was a man who chased the most potent magic until he lost everything. Only then did he catch a glimpse of love's magic. I tried to share that lesson, but the more I emphasized it, the more I drove him away. Loren, whatever you believe the soul's magic to be, until you truly behold it, desire will only take you farther from it. Silence fell in the headmaster's office. Dumbledore stared into his tea as if searching for the past in its dark surface, people who had passed through his life and the ways they'd left. Loren understood, at least in part, but his heart still brimmed with questions. After a long pause, he looked up and asked quietly, "Then what should I do, sir?" Dumbledore blinked at him. "Perhaps you should be the one to tell me." October 22nd, Friday, 1 week until the full moon. The long spell of rain had paused, and the sky over Hogwarts was a clear blue not seen for ages. The forest and lake still smelled of moisture, making the air feel clean. The younger students, relieved after a busy week, seized the rare fine weather and streamed outside. Near the North Tower, a low hill rolled gently, its turf soft and inviting, a favorite spot discovered by third years after divination. Older students had other corners of the grounds. Hogwarts seldom revealed its best spots to lower years. Third years tumbled on the slope, sprawled on stones, rolled down the hill and scrambled back up, laughing. Draco Malfoy lay on his back, hands behind his head, gazing up at the vast sky as if reading something in it. Though the rain had stopped, dew still soaked the grass and seeped into his robes, leaving a chilly dampness against his skin he seemed not to notice. Nearby, Astoria Greengrass hovered hesitantly before finally sitting down a little way off. As she drew closer, she noticed Draco's lips moving and asked, curious, "Are you eating sweets?" "Mandrake leaves." Draco lifted his tongue for her to see. "Tastes awful." Oh, Astoria's face fell briefly. Then she began to mutter to herself, "I want to join the Transfiguration Club to learn Animagus. The exam's after Halloween, but I'm only in first year." Draco wasn't paying strict attention, but the soft murmur drifted into his ears, and, for the first time in a while, he found the company pleasant. No Goyle blundering, no Parkinson's sharp voice, just the quiet presence of the girl beside him. On a distant pier, Loren tore his gaze from the castle and produced a small, tightly sealed vial from his pocket, handing it to Remus Lupin. "Sorry for the delay, Professor." Lupin took the Wolfsbane potion and studied the label. "This time it's Leopard's Bane, then?" "Yes," Loren nodded. "Professor Snape increased the concentration of the extract. You should go to the hospital wing and drink it in front of Madame Pomfrey." "Understood." A gentle breeze ruffled Lupin's hair. His face showed a melancholy that suited the cool air. 327. Is this a devil? At the far end of the pier, in a small pavilion, some Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students sat together, sharing snacks and occasionally laughing. "Professor, I still have some questions about Boggarts," one of them called. Lupin and Loren strolled along the pier toward the pavilion. A cool, slightly crisp breeze brushed their faces. If I answer them carefully, will next month's wolfsbane potion taste any better? Lupin asked with a small chuckle, glancing at the potion bottle he carried. I'm afraid I can't do anything about the taste, Loren smiled, but I'll try to make sure you don't end up in the hospital wing after drinking it again. That's gratitude enough. Lupin slipped the bottle into his pocket. Ask away, if I know the answer. Professor, where do boggarts come from? Loren asked. You bought a lot of them at once. Is there a specialist who deals in these things, or a place where they're made? Some dark creatures have origins. Dementors are tied to Azkaban, for example. If I could find where boggarts come from, maybe I could trace the dark wizard behind them, or at least the connection I feel to them. Lupin considered for a moment and shook his head. Unlike some dark creatures, boggarts aren't tied to a single birthplace. They tend to be found where people don't go: abandoned castles, deep caves, the heart of lonely woods. They're often discovered when people explore old houses or clear out long sealed trunks, under rotten staircases or inside forgotten boxes. They're not difficult to catch, and they have no special uses, so they don't command high prices. There are certainly traders on the black market who deal in dark creatures, more opportunists than respectable merchants. With enough galleons, they'll collect boggarts from various places and resell them for a profit. Loren absorbed Lupin's explanation and after a few seconds abandoned the idea of asking Lupin to buy one for him. He knew too little about boggarts and had no clear research plan. Buying one would only mean staring at it. Lupin, curious but not wanting to pry, watched Loren lost in thought. He looked up and said softly, "This is far enough. I should go back to the castle and find Madame Pomfrey to help prepare the potion." Loren glanced up and saw they had reached the bridgehead. Harry and Ron were gathered with a group around Neville, while Hermione sat at the other end, absorbed in a large book. "Goodbye, Professor." "Goodbye." After Lupin left, Loren walked toward the pavilion. Hermione and the others were there, along with Hufflepuff's Hannah, Ernie, and Justin. As he approached, Neville stammered answers to a flurry of questions, still awkward under the attention. "The exam isn't hard. If you study hard, you'll pass. I was just lucky. I don't know if I'll succeed. Professor McGonagall is helping me tutor, but there hasn't been any proper rain lately." Neville's composure wavered under more questioning. Hermione sat propped against a pillar, the book open in her hands, utterly absorbed. Late autumn had turned the air chilly, though it hadn't snowed yet. She wore a rose-red sweater under her robe and neat, dark trousers from Madame Malkin. She looked composed and quiet, like a serene figure in a winter forest. A faint rustle and the scent of oranges reached her. Hermione already knew the source. It was the scented wax tablet she'd bought at the mall and secretly slipped into Loren's trunk before term. Someone raised both hands, probably to clap her on the shoulder and startle her. Hermione turned her head and met his eyes, expression still and commanding. Loren, caught off guard, froze, then grinned and put his hands on her shoulders, as if nothing had happened before, leaning over to peer at the book. When he saw the title, Transfiguration Today, he sat back, bored. Hermione asked quietly, "How is Professor Lupin?" "He seemed fine earlier, but I'm not sure about tonight." Loren answered. Hermione looked puzzled. In the end, Loren wasn't certain whether Lupin would be all right after drinking the wolfsbane. In Monday's defense against the dark arts lesson, the professor had seemed fine, just a little pale. The students felt every day stretch on as they looked forward to Halloween and its festivities. Time seemed both interminable and fleeting. At last, it was October 29, full moon night, and the last Friday before Halloween. Big clouds clustered across the sky like ink-dyed hydrangeas. The moon pushed its pale face between them, sending dappled light down the castle walls and into the courtyard. Many students gathered below, clutching mandrake leaves and craning their necks as they waited for the moon to appear fully. In the Gryffindor common room study on the second floor, Professor Sprout stood at the window watching the courtyard with evident exasperation. Closing the window, the plump herbology professor turned to McGonagall, who was grading papers at her desk. "Minerva, aren't you going to supervise them?" "You worry too much, Pomona," McGonagall replied without looking up. "Holding a mandrake leaf in their mouths under moonlight, no one should have a problem. even those who haven't taken the class. Sprout walked over, pouring herself a glass of pumpkin juice as she muttered, "They won't come to you if they fail. They'll just try every trick to get mandrake leaves from the greenhouses." She sounded affronted. "I told them at the start of term, but they've only gotten worse. Some students not even in the class are stripping leaves. Go see the greenhouses, Minerva. Some mandrakes are so bare they're hiding in the soil." McGonagall allowed herself a small smile. "I'm sorry, Pomona. I didn't think so many would attempt the animagus ritual." Sprout sampled her juice and sighed. "I can guess their thought process. Hold the mandrake leaf now. Worry about the rest of the ritual after passing the exam. It's astonishing. Where do they get such confidence?" Harry, perched on a corridor railing, looked at the cool mandrake leaf in his palm and shared the question. "Ron, shouldn't we pass the exam before trying the ritual?" Ron, deep in discussion with Seamus and Justin, waved him off. Harry sighed, unreliable, as usual. A soft voice answered. Luna, holding Ginny's hand, drifted over in her odd, dreamy way, her oversized, colorful glasses sitting askew. "Are rack spurts bothering you again?" "Oh, good evening, Luna and Ginny." Harry's gaze lingered on Ginny's vivid red hair, bright even in the dim. "Is the transfiguration exam difficult?" Luna's voice chimed like a song. "I don't know either." Harry scratched his head. "Last time we didn't read the questions carefully. We didn't expect Professor McGonagall to ask about being an animagus. You could ask Loren and Hermione." Harry scanned the courtyard, but they weren't in sight. "They're not here." Ginny's eyes flashed with a touch of envy. "They're probably out on a date." "Probably. Those two are always together." Harry nodded, then noticed Ginny and Luna looking at him oddly. Ginny asked, "When did they start dating? First year?" "I don't know. When I first saw Loren and Hermione on the Hogwarts Express, they were together, though they weren't very close in those first weeks." Harry remembered the early term vaguely. "They're enviable, aren't they, Harry?" Ginny's eyes shone like the moon, and Harry felt his heart skip. She seemed different at Hogwarts, less shy, more direct. He stammered, then brightened and pointed toward the hall. "Look, Loren and Hermione are back. Ask them if you have questions." At Harry's shout, several students ran off toward the great hall, Ron tugging him along. Ginny ground her teeth as they left. Hermione and Loren returned together from the hall to the courtyard. "Do you really think it's okay to leave Professor Lupin alone?" Hermione asked. "Don't worry, he'd manage if he transformed in his office," Loren replied. Hermione nodded, then asked, puzzled, "Why did Professor specifically ask you to get a heat-retaining amulet?" Loren thought of Lupin in his wolf form, feasting ravenously on a chicken leg, and answered, maybe because it's Friday." Before Hermione could ask more, a crowd of familiar faces rushed up. Seamus led them, panting and clutching a mandrake leaf. "Loren, Hermione, do we need to prepare anything before holding the mandrake leaf in our mouths? Neville can't explain it clearly." Dean and Justin hung back, eager. Loren licked his lips, thinking. He and Hermione had only just spat out the mandrake leaves they'd held on the way back from the Shrieking Shack, and they still felt oddly light and relieved. "Be mentally prepared," he said seriously. The students looked confused. What do you mean?" Loren explained. "If you start holding mandrake leaves tonight, be prepared to miss out on Hogsmeade." Faces fell. Loren continued, enumerating the lost delights. "You'll miss honeydukes, pepper imps, fizzing whizbees, exploding bonbons, Drubal's best chewing gum, acid pops, jelly slugs." With each candy, he named, their eyes dimmed a little more, until they looked genuinely miserable. "And Zonko's will be out of bounds, and Madame Puddifoot's will be crowded, and the 3 broomsticks." Hermione pinched him to shut him up. Loren smacked his lips, enjoying the effect a little too much as he watched their stunned expressions. "Maybe you should wait until you pass the transfiguration exam," Justin murmured weakly, and the others fell silent, temptation warring with reason. Loren added softly, "The exam results aren't out until December. December has Christmas and wonderful feasts and more treats." The full moon rolled out from behind the clouds, and a cool breeze swept the courtyard. Ron's eyes flickered between the thought of becoming an animagus, the promise of Hogsmeade, and the delights of Christmas, as if some mischievous voice whispered, "Young wizard, do you want the animagus that will make you stand out, or a brilliant trip to Hogsmeade and Christmas delights?" 328. Hogsmeade Hermione hauled Loren away before he could say anything more outrageous, not because she feared he would be ganged up on, but because she worried the others wouldn't be able to sleep, lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring into the dark and questioning everything. She pulled him into a shadowed corner and glanced back at the clusters of third years who were still frozen in place. "You've said enough," she scolded, frowning. "What about you? You're not planning to wait until after the Christmas holiday to start the ritual, are you?" They had agreed to begin their animagus preparations together that month, but what he had suggested made her uneasy. Loren feigned deliberation, putting on a hesitant act. "Well, I suppose. Hogsmeade and Christmas are both rare chances, aren't they?" Hermione ground her teeth, about to pluck a mandrake leaf out and force him to decide, when his tone changed. "Unless someone can keep their promise," he added softly. "Promise?" Hermione froze. Then she remembered the ridiculous bargain they'd made at the beginning of the month and felt her chest tighten. "You mean there's something more valuable than Christmas?" Loren looked at her directly. The moonlight caught in his eyes like clear springs. His voice was low, almost reverent. "We agreed, didn't we? 1 month of perseverance can be exchanged for a kiss. 1 month has already been banked, and as the ritual goes on, that agreement still stands." The words blurred at the edges as Hermione's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Thump, thump, thump. When the rhythm in her chest finally settled, she realized Loren's lips were still moving, moonlight pooling in his eyes. Something unnameable flowed in the quiet between them. "All right," she said softly. "What?" Loren was surprised at how easily she agreed. Half his persuasion was left unspoken. "I said I agree," she told him, managing a small, shy smile. She felt her reason wobble under an unfamiliar current of feeling, impulsive and daring, softer than she usually allowed herself to be. She didn't fight it. In weather like this, on a night like this, who would want to miss such a moment? Hermione leaned in, voice teasing. "So when do you want this kiss?" Her face was so close he could see the tiny hairs at her temple. He felt her breath on his mouth, warm and a little quick. On an autumn night like this, Loren's breath hitched. The moon seemed almost too bright, and time slowed. A trivial piece of trivia he'd once read came back to him, the idea that in any interaction, the one who moves first makes the other the passive partner. "How about now?" he murmured. Her lips met his. The kiss was soft and cool at first, the moonlight like water around them, the courtyard's noise washed away by a gentle breeze. Around them, students laughed and talked, but in that small corner near the wall, the bustle fell away. The sensation was impossible to describe, new and oddly sweet. Loren, who was used to taking the initiative, found himself happily passive for once. It felt comforting and warm, like biting into a steaming, syrupy, baked sweet potato on a bitter night, sudden, sweet, and intensely alive. A warmth spread through him, pooling in the left side of his chest until he felt utterly soft. When Hermione drew back, she took 2 quick steps away, fanned her flushed face with trembling fingers, sighed, and then lifted her chin with a triumphant, unshakable smile. Loren felt dazzled. The moon itself couldn't outshine the light in his chest. In weather like this, on a night like this, the thought hung between them, we'd rather be wrong than miss out. After lights out, they returned to the common room together. Loren watched Hermione climb the stairs to the girls' dormitory and couldn't wipe the grin off his face. He hummed tunelessly as he tucked the mandrake leaf into his pocket and padded back to the dormitory, only to find his roommates still awake, clustered around Neville's bed. "Evening, mates," Loren called as he reached for his wardrobe. "So, what's the verdict? Are you keeping the mandrake leaf?" The others turned. Ron's eyebrows lifted when he saw the smile still plastered to Loren's face. "Neville finally convinced us," Ron reported. "We've always found excuses to put it off, and he didn't know what to do, but from now on, we're sticking to it." "That sounds very Neville," Loren teased, untying his tie and swapping robes for pajamas. Harry raised an eyebrow. "Loren, have you already started carrying one?" Loren opened his hand and showed the leaf. "Yes," he said simply. His friends were incredulous. They'd never pictured Loren giving up Hogsmeade for animagus practice. "You're not going to miss the sweets? Zonkos? The 3 broomsticks?" Seamus asked, eyes wide. "Candies can be ordered," Loren said with a shrug. "And I've already been to all the shops and pubs. There's nothing new there for me. He went to wash up, leaving 3 shocked faces behind. He said he's been to everything, Seamus muttered. But we're only third years. Tomorrow's the first trip to Hogsmeade proper, isn't it? He's Loren, Neville said calmly. Ron, Harry, and Seamus fell silent, the taste of the mandrake leaf suddenly a little bitter in their mouths. October 30th, Saturday. Tomorrow was Halloween, and this weekend was Hogsmeade Activity Week. Even though the third years had hardly slept the night before, they rose early, dark circles under their eyes. In the girls' dormitory, Hermione sat in front of the full-length mirror by her wardrobe, carefully combing out her hair with a wooden brush. Her small face was tense in concentration. She flushed all over as a memory from the previous night came back, what she had done and how her heart had raced. Lavender and Parvati fussed beside her, chattering. "We'll go to Honeyduke's for sweets first, then the 3 broomsticks," Lavender said. "But I most want to go to Madame Putafoot's. It's perfect for dates," she giggled at Hermione. "Hermione, you must take Loren to Madame Putafoot's." Parvati joined the teasing, and when Hermione stayed quiet, they waved a hand in front of her face. "What's up with you?" Hermione hesitated, glancing at her wardrobe. "I was wondering, should I wear a dress to Hogsmeade?" "You're mad," Parvati blurted. "It's late October. Could be snowing." Reason returned. By the time Hermione met Loren in the Great Hall, she had settled on something sensible. A mid-length black velvet coat that nipped slightly at the waist, worn over slim gray-brown trousers that showed the shape of her calves beneath the cuffs. They tacitly avoided mentioning the previous night as they ate, then assembled in the antechamber on the first floor as Professor McGonagall had instructed. The morning was cold and misted. Their breath added white puffs to the air. Mr. Filch went over the rules, then Professor McGonagall stepped forward with the final admonition. "Remember, signatures from guardians are only the basic requirement," she warned. "A trip to Hogsmeade is a privilege for well-behaved students. If you don't want that privilege revoked, best not to cause trouble." Her stern expression quieted the third years, many of whom were making their first real trip into the village. Fred, standing behind Loren, snorted under his breath. "Buying a few stink bombs, belching pastilles, or fainting fancies is still allowed," he muttered. "Just don't use them on Filch," George added with a grin. Lee Jordan pushed the twins aside with a deadpan look. "A friendly reminder, avoid using them on the old bat," he said, and Loren blinked, sensing there was a story behind that nickname. McGonagall and Filch led the students out of the castle, away from the Black Lake and toward the main gate. The Quidditch pitch lay on the left, an open field, and the shadowed edge of the Forbidden Forest on the right. Filch unlocked the heavy gate with his large brass key, and 2 winged boar statues, odd, squat creatures, stood sentinel on either side. The third years craned their necks, curious about everything beyond the school grounds. When they stepped outside, the mist seemed to thicken, and several cloaked figures in the distance drifted like black stains against the sky. The sight made Harry shiver, but Ron clapped him on the shoulder. "Professor McGonagall's with us," he said, easing the tension as the crowd flowed toward Hogsmeade. Last year, Loren and Hermione had slipped into Honeyduke's through a secret passage and missed the trip itself, so both appreciated the slow reveal of the village, the mist sliding off trees and hedges, bright banners and streamers strung from eaves, and the colorful smoke curling from shop signs, dyeing the morning fog with magic. Hogsmeade depended on Hogwarts custom, and after a long, dull term, the students' arrival made the village glow with life. Merchants had been eager, the Dementor scare had delayed activity week, and the street looked unusually festive. McGonagall instructed the prefects to count their charges before dismissing the students into the village. As soon as she waved them off, everyone surged forward, the streets filling with noise and jostle. The most anticipated, of course, was Honeyduke's. Inside, the sweet shop shelves were stacked with slabs of creamy brittle, glossy pink coconut ice, jars of honey-colored toffee, and dark nut-studded chocolate balls. The air smelled of sugar and warmth. The third years stood wide-eyed as though they'd stepped into a candy-colored dream. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Hermione read from the tasting sign. She remembered the beans from a year ago. The possibility of earwax or booger flavor had made the memory vivid. This time, the tasting tray offered only more ordinary categories: sweet, sour, bitter, spicy, and salty. For a moment, Hermione frowned. Were the beans really that tame? A hand offered her one. Hermione looked up. It was Loren, grinning like a child. He held out a green bean labeled sour. Even the smell made her wince. He'd tried to trick her like this before. Hermione met his look and, with a small, defiant smile, put the bean in her mouth. Loren, however, twisted his wrist and pulled the bean back. "Honestly," he said, mockingly disdainful, "you can tell by the smell. It's going to be awful." At that moment, Lee Jordan, a few paces away, emitted a retching sound and clutched a dustbin, scrubbing his mouth violently. Fred and George patted his back in what looked like sympathy and amusement. "Oh dear," Fred said. "We thought it was just ordinary candy." "Try a sweet one instead," George suggested, grinning. Lee didn't look up. He raised a shaky hand and gave them the middle finger without even lifting his head. 329, memory ball and camera. "Loren, Hermione, we're about to go out for a stroll. Want to come along?" Harry edged his way out of the crowded shop and hurried over to them, breathless. Loren's face registered a mild amusement. He gave Harry a curious look. "Honeydukes, aren't you enjoying it? Why are you leaving already?" Ron, who had just squeezed up behind him, heard and let out a mournful little whine. "It's because of the animagus and the mandrake leaf. Have you seen Lee Jordan? If we hang around any longer, the whole ritual will be a washout on the first day." Yeah, Harry nodded, swallowing the drool the sweets had made him produce. "Ron has a point." Hermione's voice was soft, then she shot an exaggerated glare at someone. "And unlike you actually tried to feed me Bertie Bott's every flavor beans." "Didn't I stop in time?" Loren muttered defensively, but he still led Hermione out of the jammed shop. Outside, the golden sun had burned off the morning mist. Colorful bunting fluttered in the street by Gladrag's Wizardwear, somewhere they hadn't explored the last time they'd been in Hogsmeade. "It's a huge chain," Ron rattled on excitedly. "They've got branches in London and Paris. Supposedly pure bloods like their stuff. My mum says it's ridiculous, though. No normal witch or wizard would wear half of it now." Curiosity won out, and they wandered in to have a look. The clothes on display were eccentric, even a little unnerving. Gowns in sickly purples, bruised greens, and reds so dark they looked like dried blood, cloak-like garments that could have been mistaken for Dementor's robes, and tight outfits wrapped like bandages, pointed hats with brims crowded by grotesque animal statuettes, withered parrots, coiled snakes whose eyes seemed to flicker. "Merlin," Ron shivered. "Is that snake real? Its eyes are moving." Harry grinned and murmured spooky stories into Ron's ear, tales of dark wizards who ran wax museums and doll shops where customers were turned into exhibits. Ron, though he knew Harry was teasing, couldn't help looking a little pale. Hermione, more practical, said, "It reminds me of the Leaky Cauldron crowd when Professor McGonagall took us. People do wear odd things." Loren nodded. "Neville's Gran had a hat like that once. Maybe it's just tradition." They weren't wax figures, and the staff were perfectly ordinary. The shop led them deeper into more normal clothes and even Muggle fashions. After Harry bought a pair of bizarrely patterned socks for Dobby, Loren picked out a few silly scarves and felt hats. Hogsmeade showed its unexpected sides. There was no shortage of quill shops, though, which made Hermione light up. She pulled the others into a store packed with quills, auto-transcribing quills, cheating quills. Harry and Ron exchanged knowingly amused looks, then abandoned any temptation to buy trouble that would earn detention from Professor McGonagall. A year on, the Quidditch shop looked slightly different. Its sign altered, but the scene outside was unchanged. A crowd of wide-eyed young wizards pressed to the window, marveling at flying brooms. The shopkeeper, a scruffy middle-aged man, bantered with his young assistant while passing out pilfered sweets to the little ones. "If only I could have a nimbus," someone sighed. "The firebolt's the fastest now." "That doesn't matter. Quidditch is not a racing sport." The owner seized the chance to reminisce about his school days while his assistant slipped in a plug for the pricier brooms. The assembled children scattered with a giggle and a run for the next shop. The owner huffed and chased his assistant out, cheeks puffed in mock outrage. Loren and Hermione watched, smiling. There was something comforting about an old, familiar scene. Harry stepped forward and clapped a hand on the owner's shoulder. "Sir, could I get some windproof goggles? It always rains during winter training and makes it hard to see." The owner's stern face softened instantly. "Windproof goggles, of course." Hermione blinked. "Don't they have waterproof charms?" "They do, but one drives the rain straight into your eyes," Ron said, thoughtful. "I should get a pair too. I'll be captain soon." They fell silent, tacitly agreeing not to bring up leaving for tea at Madame Putafoot's. The mandrake leaf they had to keep in their mouths made every candy shop and joke shop an exercise in willpower. Harry and Ron walked past Zonks with painful, stiff expressions, resisting temptation. Loren and Hermione felt the same as they passed, unable to suggest splitting up under the accusing looks of their friends. By the time they reached the far end of the main street, it was nearly noon. To keep the mandrake leaf safe and avoid further temptation, they chose to spend the afternoon at the Three Broomsticks. The pub was warm, cluttered, and full of smoke. Behind the bar, Madame Rosmerta served a rowdy table of men and a few strange, cloaked figures, creatures with unusual skin and nails that made it clear they weren't human. Harry and Ron, seeing Madame Rosmerta in her fitted dress, smirked. She had a way about her that drew attention. Loren returned from the counter with drinks and snacks while Ron's face went a touch red. He volunteered to fetch more, wanting to get used to the place, and Harry watched bemused as they tried a bewildering array of beverages: butterbeer, lemonade, cherry juice, hot spiced mead, until their heads spun. Having stayed up late the night before and up early for the gathering, they drifted into sleepiness at the tables, more dozing than deep sleep, eyes drooping, then snapping open when someone passed. Other tired students filtered in after lunch, finding corner tables to rest at. Madame Rosmerta wiped glasses and watched the exhausted, excited youngsters with a fond smile. It was a rare, quiet respite for her. As the sun began to sink, the pub filled again, bathed in a golden-red afterglow. "Loren, Harry, you're here too!" Neville's voice made Loren blink and pull the arm he'd been using as a pillow back from under Hermione's head. He shook his numb arm to wake up properly. Others roused themselves as well. "Neville, what a surprise!" Loren rubbed his arm and grinned when he saw Hannah talking with Madame Rosmerta. "I thought you and Hannah would be at Madame Putafoot's." Neville's face colored. "It's not like that. Hannah wanted to see the Three Broomsticks. She's related to Tom, the leaky cauldron owner." Loren laughed and left it at that. Harry and Ron, now awake, exchanged looks and shouted toward the bar. "Neville! Hannah! When did this happen? Tell us!" They left the pub together, strolling back toward Hogwarts as the rest of Hogsmeade trickled home, small groups chattering about the day. "Bad news," Seamus announced suddenly, catching everyone's attention. "Dean's and my mandrake leaf broke at Zonks." "That's tragic," Ron said solemnly, then brightened. "But ours are fine. Ha!" They chased and shoved one another down the wide road, laughter spilling out into the dusk. Harry's brow creased. He looked unsettled. "What's the matter?" Ron asked. "I feel like I've forgotten something," Harry said, frowning. "But I can't remember what." Neville rummaged in his pocket and produced a small, clear orb. He handed it to Harry. It glowed a bright, furious red the instant Harry held it. "That's a remembrall," Neville said. "It's to remind you you've forgotten something important." "I know I forgot something important," Harry grumbled. "I just don't know what." "The remembrall doesn't tell you. It only tells you that you've forgotten." Neville shrugged. The others laughed. This time the joke was on Harry. They passed a dingy little pub off the main street, a place that looked almost abandoned. Grime streaked the frames, barely any light leaked through the windows, and a candle behind the door threw only a weak glow. A heavy, gamey smell drifted out, mutton perhaps, and the group gave it a wide berth. Then Harry stopped short and cried, "I remember!" Everyone turned. Harry reached into his jacket and pulled out a brand new camera from his storage scales. "Colin gave me this and asked me to take interesting photos for him. I forgot all about it back at Honeyduke's." The sun was lowering into a rare, cloudy twilight, the afterglow laying a smooth, golden sheet across the street. Loren stepped forward and clapped Harry on the shoulder. "Let's take a group photo right here, like those old pictures in Headmaster Dumbledore's office. Years from now, we'll look at it and remember our first time in Hogsmeade in third year. That'll be something." They liked the idea instantly. In front of Honeydukes. Let's go now. No, wait, the light's perfect here. Hermione didn't join the back and forth. She walked close to Loren and tugged his sleeve. Does your arm still hurt? She asked. Not really, he said. Just a bit numb. They settled on the entrance to Hogsmeade for the shot. Harry found a Hufflepuff senior to take it. On the left, Hannah beamed, tugging Neville's sleeve to make sure he looked at the camera. Harry and Ron stood awkwardly in the middle with stiff smiles. Seamus and Dean grinned broadly, showing their gums, and Loren and Hermione stood together on the right, mirroring each other's gentle expressions. Other third years who'd spotted them crowded in, laughter and crooked smiles filling the frame. Under the sunset's glow, they held their pose, and for a moment the scene was frozen, a bright sliver of time caught and preserved. 330. The wind was howling, and a heavy rain was coming Sunday evening. The Great Hall was alive with Halloween decorations, hundreds of lit pumpkins, a noisy swarm of live bats wheeling through the air, and orange banners that drifted across the storm-darkened ceiling like lazy, colorful snakes. The tables were a spread of tempting treats. The younger students who had already gorged themselves at Honeydukes exchanged worried looks. Their stomachs protested, but their tongues begged for more. Loren kept glancing up at the staff table. The leopard flower wolfsbane potion had seemed to do the trick. Professor Lupin looked no different than usual, chatting cheerfully with Professor Flitwick. If anything was off, it was Professor Snape. His dark eyes kept flicking toward Lupin, more often than seemed comfortable. At the front of the hall, a space had been cleared and a straight stage set up. Sir Nicholas had reenacted his beheading to great effect, and at least the first years watched wide-eyed. The rowdy, festive Halloween had passed, and Hogwarts slipped into November. The air grew colder. The north wind never stopped, making some old wooden windows groan and rattle. When the castle corridors filled with the wind at night, it sounded like a mourning female wail. Some swore a banshee hid in the stonework. And so fewer students were out of bed after dark. On a normal Friday evening, just before the torches died down, Loren made his way to the Slytherin prefect's office in the dungeons. The increased leopard flower concentration in the wolfsbane potion had shown promise. From Lupin's report after taking it, the leopard flower extract seemed, in some ways, more effective than the Rafflesia. They still had to finish the control experiments. This month, they were due to test the corpse flower. Loren, quiet with worry for Lupin, knocked and went in. Snape sat as always behind his desk. An old journal about his time in Africa opened before him, a quill poised half an inch above the paper, as if he were hesitating where to begin. He dipped the quill when Loren came in, nodded once, and the faint cold light in his eyes shifted. Professor, here are Professor Lupin's notes after he took the potion, Loren said, handing over a sheet of parchment scrawled in crooked, clawed handwriting and punctured in places where, presumably, a werewolf's claws had torn it. While Snape read, Loren explained, from the effects, the higher concentration of leopard flower extract is much stronger than the Rafflesia. According to Lupin, the potion's effect that keeps him conscious lasts longer. He was still very active until noon the day after the change. He couldn't sleep, even if he wanted to. Snape frowned at the smashed lettering. He read through the ragged report with obvious distaste, but did not interrupt. When he set the paper down, his brows remained tightly knit. So you wish to extend the wolfsbane's effective period? He asked slowly. Loren echoed the phrase, thinking aloud. The leopard flower modification already kept Lupin awake until noon after reverting to human form. You don't mean turning the wolfsbane into a stimulant that keeps him awake until he collapses, do you? He asked cautiously. You mean one dose that lasts for months? Snape snorted impatiently. Loren fell silent, puzzling through the problem. He had studied the wolfsbane potion carefully when experimenting with the stench flowers. Its mechanisms were complex and interlinked. A werewolf must drink the potion a week before the full moon so that its active ingredients and the potion's magic can circulate, lie dormant, and then be reawakened by the moon's power at transformation, so the mind remains intact during the change. Forcibly increasing the dose to lengthen the effect would only mean prolonged sleeplessness, which might lead to madness or worse. I can't think of a solution right now, Loren admitted. You are young and inexperienced in potion development, Snape said flatly, not unkindly. He tapped the torn parchment with a long finger, then pushed it away to his journal with visible distaste. He considered Loren, then chose his words carefully. In some primitive tribes in Africa, the relationship between witches and non-magical people differs from ours. Certain magical practitioners are revered as elders or shamans. They do not generally show the magical world to non-magicals, but when wealthy non-magical nations send supplies, they sometimes bring a kind of muggle tablet that cannot be broken, chewed, or ground into powder. Snape's voice carried the faint trace of the muggle knowledge he rarely used. Because the true active ingredient is too strong to be given in a single plain dose, it must be extended-release medicine, Loren blurted, eyes bright. Snape allowed a thin, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. Precisely. Preparations that slowly release the active agent after administration, reducing the need for repeated dosing, increasing compliance, and reducing side effects. This is what I intend to try in the Potions Club. Loren's face lit up. Professor, what will you do? This will be a project for the club, Snape said. Continue the current experiments. I will arrange work on extended release formulations. He flicked through some papers and then mentioned invitations for the club would go out soon. This time the requirements would be relaxed. We will recruit first years and second years. Gather some rue and fluid flowers for them to process. Start mass production of lower-level potions. Senior members will manage the projects. Loren nodded obediently, silently saying another prayer for Lupin. Snape handed over the notes on the corpse flower and indicated plans for the upcoming work. The school's enterprise in potion development was growing, and so was the need for more hands. Outside, the wind had grown furious. It screamed through corridors and staircases, shrieking and whistling in Loren's ears. If a banshee had stepped out from some shadowed corner, he would not have been surprised. He said goodnight to the fat lady and slipped into the common room, where a warm fire glowed. Hermione sat by it, bundled up and writing, a fresh quill in hand. Loren grinned and dropped into the armchair beside her, peering at her ancient runes homework. Good evening, Hermione. Her quill hesitated, leaving a small blot on the parchment, but she returned. Good evening. What are you doing? Homework. What homework? Hermione made a face. Runes homework. You don't want to talk to me. You're colder than the wind outside. She pursed her lips. I'm translating a short poem. Loren leaned over to look. Winifred's saying, he guessed, 9 times the lazy person, by his delay, spoils 9 successful ventures. The 9 here is figurative. It should read, every time the lazy person, meaning any successful venture. Hermione paused and then started a fresh line, making corrections with a reluctant, almost grateful frown. Oh, I suppose that is right, 9 as a figure of speech. She had had enough. She set down her quill and glared. If you say another word before I finish, I'll take you down with me. Loren blinked innocently. Did I do something wrong? You're deliberately interfering with my homework. She hissed. I thought I was helping, he said, and settled obediently to the side. He soon grew restless and wandered over to join the others gathered around a spirited discussion of Quidditch. The group had formed a circle, current players in the middle, hopefuls around them. Oliver Wood waved Loren over. Those Slytherins are rotten, he raked his hands through his hair. They suddenly proposed changing opponents because it's going to rain tomorrow and they haven't trained in the wet. Flint says one of his players has a cold. I swear. So now we have to play Hufflepuff. How could Hufflepuff agree? Fred Weasley asked in disbelief. Cedric's the captain now. He's a decent sort, gentlemanlike. Flint took advantage, Wood said through gritted teeth. Angelina and Alicia stifled giggles. That tall, handsome one, Angelina tittered about Cedric. He doesn't talk much, very gentlemanly. Fred snorted. He doesn't talk much because he's dull as dishwater. Words don't form whole sentences in his head. Lee Jordan from the back shouted, Say that to his face tomorrow. Laughter broke out. Everyone knew Cedric was good, an excellent student and a strong duelist, probably stronger than Fred. Fred merely laughed and made blustery threats. The room buzzed with good-natured chaos. Quiet. We're discussing tactics, Wood said sternly. Don't worry, Oliver. You're the nerve of the team. Cedric's just new to captaincy. He can't match our skills. George tried to reassure him, while Fred insisted, "We've got 3 better brooms than theirs, the Firebolt and the Invincible Harry." Harry smiled shyly at the boast, but nodded to Wood, lending support to the departing captain. Wood fell quiet, and for a moment looked far away, remembering when the team had been first formed, back when Gryffindor had been beaten down by Slytherin for years. That had been 2 years gone now. He smiled again and, with renewed determination, said, "I understand. We'll win." They went on to talk about trials for new players, which had been planned for Sunday, until the approaching storm might force a postponement. Loren watched Hermione finish her homework and pack away her papers. He brightened and sat back down beside her. "It's the start of the month. Shouldn't we write home?" he asked. They were in the habit of sending at least 1 letter a month. Hermione half laughed and half blushed, remembering the sentimental letter she had already sent. "Send them together or separate?" she asked after a moment. "Together," she decided. "Tomorrow, after the Quidditch match, we can go to the Owlery." "It looks like it's going to rain tomorrow," Loren muttered. "I don't want to watch a match in the rain." The common room fell suddenly and completely quiet. Everyone looked up as Professor McGonagall entered, her expression unusually grave. 331. The storm is swaying. The flames are rising. The Gryffindor common room fell silent. Seamus, mid-game of exploding snap, stared at the card in his hand as if it had suddenly become a live thing. The other boys instinctively edged away. Percy rushed forward. "Professor McGonagall, is there something urgent at this hour?" "There's an urgent message for Wood about tomorrow's Quidditch match." Professor McGonagall's face was stern as she scanned the room, brow furrowed. "Please fetch Longbottom for me. I can't see him." "Yes, Professor." Percy nodded and called to Wood. While Wood spoke quietly with McGonagall, Percy hurried to the window and pulled Neville, who had been staring blankly into the night, away from the cold glass. Wood exchanged a few hushed words with McGonagall. His expression darkened. Neville followed McGonagall out of the common room, and the brief hush was broken when the exploding snap card in Seamus's hand detonated, startling everyone. The Quidditch team clustered around. "What happened?" "Oliver, tell us quick." Wood answered with difficulty. "The school has restricted brooms for the match. The firebolt can't be used." The news stunned Harry for a moment, then anxiety crept in. "So what broom are we limited to?" "Nimbus 2000. The team relaxed and laughed. "All right, that's not so bad. We're not at a disadvantage." "Hufflepuff won't be used to it either. Same starting line for everyone." Hermione, who had finished her homework, leaned toward Loren and whispered, "What do you think McGonagall wants with Neville?" Loren peered into the blackness beyond the window. The wind whistled around the sealed panes. He answered softly, "For the coming thunder." In the wizarding world, it was commonly said that many old pureblood families were fading. The Peverils, who had been immortalized in story by the Deathly Hallows, were gone. The Gaunts had died out after a litany of tragedies. Old Marvolo Gaunt perished soon after Azkaban, and Morphin Gaunt died in his sentence. Rumors of an unseen Gaunt daughter persisted, but no one had proof. People at the Leaky Cauldron muttered that the Crouch line would die out. Crouch Sr.'s son had been a Death Eater who died in Azkaban, and gossiped about other families too. Most talked about the Longbottoms. Once proud Aurors, the couple had been thought ruined, their child a squib, so the story went. But courtesy of Dumbledore, the boy had been allowed to study at Hogwarts. Recently, that belief had been overturned. The once troubled Auror couple had recovered and been discharged. In less than half a year, they had tracked down wanted criminals and even brought escaped Death Eaters to justice. Their child, far from being a squib, had shown exceptional skill at dueling at school. After graduation, he would likely be as formidable as his parents. On a night of howling wind, Neville walked slowly and with effort at Professor McGonagall's side toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. He was preparing to drink the secret potion and attempt the animagus transformation the moment thunder first rolled across the sky. The wind was strong enough to unbalance him. McGonagall raised her wand and conjured a thin, shimmering barrier to keep the worst of the chill away. She took Neville's hand and led him to the spot where the potion had been buried. Minerva McGonagall herself was an animagus. After a year of organizing and publishing her research on human transformation, she had become one of the foremost living authorities on the subject. She knew that tonight's ritual had little chance of success, but she was determined to help this student, Neville Longbottom, attempt it. The process was tedious. Mandrake leaves, burying the secret potion, daily incantations whispered to the heart, waiting for suitable weather. In this age, only 7 animagi were registered at the ministry. Even counting unregistered ones, they could be counted on 2 hands. Many brilliant students had tried and failed. Only Neville had reached this stage. Most people underestimated Neville. He was not the most talented or athletic, often shy and awkward, but to several professors he was the truest kind of Gryffindor, unambitious in hunger for power, diligent with what lay before him, and quietly brave. As they reached the spot, the air was damp and misty, and McGonagall glanced up at the clouded sky, calculating the timing in her head. Noticing Neville's trembling, she summoned a ring of small blue flames to float around them, their warmth a comfort in the cold. "Neville," she asked softly, "have you been repeating the spell to your heart every day?" And have you heard a second heartbeat?" Neville nodded once, then shook his head, uncertain. McGonagall only smiled and began to remind him gently of the details he must watch for during the transformation: changes in body shape, the danger of losing rational thought, how to hold on. "Attention," she said suddenly, sniffing the air. "The storm is coming." Neville steadied himself and focused on the marked place where the potion was buried. A lightning flash lit the sky and a crack of thunder answered it. He dug out a bottle of deep red potion, held his wand against his heart, feeling its steady drum. He inhaled, swallowed the potion, and whispered the incantation: "Amato, animo, animato, animagus." Inside his chest, something answered his heartbeat. A small, separate thump. Pain like tearing spread through him, and the changes began. His skin seemed to split, then tighten. Pressure pressed on his bones as if they were being crushed and reshaped. Dark brown fur pushed through, divided along the crown of his head into 2 tones. Dark brown at the front, grayish-white along the back, so that he could not tell what creature he might become. His teeth lengthened even as his stature shrank. Rain hammered down around them. Professor McGonagall watched in silence, her face unreadable. The telltale change she looked for did not appear. Neville's robes were unchanged. As the pain peaked, the transformation wavered, then began to reverse. Fur retreated inch by inch, his fangs shrank, the new shape dissolved back into his human form. For a few breathless minutes, Neville lay on the sodden ground, rain soaking him through. His robes clung cold and heavy to his skin. The rain cooled the burning on his surface, but every bone ached. Exhaustion pulled at him, begging him to sleep, to stop trying. He forced himself up, splashing in the mud. McGonagall knelt beside him and, with a hand that was thin but warm, brushed sweat and rain from his brow. "You did very well," she said quietly. Neville managed a strained smile as his vision blurred. In the Gryffindor boys' dormitory, a single candle guttered on a bedside table. A bag of sweets lay open, the bright wrappers scattered and torn. In the library, flames spat from the tip of Loren's wand as he tried to contain an uncontrollable fiendfire. His efforts only fed it. The fire leapt to the shelves, racing up them with ferocious speed. Fireballs swelled, and a serpent of ash slithered from one of them along the bookcases. The scene repeated, over and over, until the whole library was a churning sea of fiendfire. Ropes of ash and flame braided together into a many-headed, fire-breathing hydra that lunged straight at Loren. He shuddered, flung his wand into the blaze, and with a flick of his hand, the inferno vanished, leaving the library intact. Nicholas Flamel, watching nearby, said dryly, "If this had happened in the castle, you'd have burned all the teachers and students." Loren laughed and scratched his head. "Why do I feel like I'm getting better at starting fires, but I haven't learned how to stop them?" "Because fiendfire as a magic is uncontrollable," Flamel replied calmly. "Your talent can strengthen its power, but you cannot command it. To halt it, you must stop the magic itself. Use a counterspell or a termination charm." "You sound like you've had a lot of practice," Loren said. Flamel only shrugged and disappeared with a small wave, as if done with the conversation. Back in the dormitory, Harry, Ron, and Seamus lay half-reclining under blankets, snacking. They glanced toward the door from time to time. Do you think Neville will succeed? Seamus murmured. Didn't you say you didn't want to learn animagus? Why are you worrying about it? Ron asked, popping a Bertie Bott's every flavor bean into his mouth. His face contorted immediately in disgust, and he writhed on the bed as if struck by a bad taste, then rolled off in a fit. I still would like to learn in principle, Seamus muttered. It's just too much trouble, and I'm worried about Neville. Harry, chewing on a mandrake leaf and worrying about the Quidditch match, said, I'll probably mess up the leaf during tomorrow's game. There's a good chance of that. Loren, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly sat up and whispered, He's back. The dormitory door burst open, and Neville stumbled in, drenched and exhausted, trailing cold. The boys read it at once. They had expected failure. The congratulatory lines they'd prepared died on their tongues. They wanted to comfort him, but didn't want to pry. Loren stretched and adopted a lazy, teasing tone. The animagus class is recruiting new students. Neville, you'll have to go up and share your experience. Neville, wrapped in a bathrobe, pictured the idea and immediately shook his head, embarrassed. I'm just going to have a shower. Ah, Loren said, shaking his head. You're the closest to success among us. Even if Professor McGonagall won't have you up on a stage, everyone else will pepper you with questions. Flushed, Neville scuttled away to the washroom. Harry and the others exchanged puzzled looks. How had Loren turned Neville's dejection into something nearly cheerful with only a few words? After showering and composing himself, Neville returned. The others didn't press him about the animagus attempt. Instead, they waved and grinned. Come try the new Bertie Bott's beans. Ron swears by them. Ron, still smarting from his earlier taste, nodded on the strength of routine. Yes, bring some for Hannah, too. Try them while you watch the match tomorrow. She's in Hufflepuff. She can cheer for us. Poison them before the match, are we? Seamus joked. They laughed and teased, and Neville, teeth brushed, hair still damp, joined them. He didn't refuse a candy, even though the taste buds that had been numb from the rain might not have approved. Harry, Dementors and I are at odds with each other. Dementors and I are at odds with each other. This was the fiercest rain of the year. Strong winds howled late into the night, finally easing a little by morning. The whooshing rush of air still rattled in Loren's ears when a cold gust brushed the back of his neck, and he suddenly sat up. Peeves, the prank-loving poltergeist, was lying against his pillow, blowing into his ear. Loren had no idea how Peeves had slipped into the dormitory, but the mischief maker was cackling and hanging upside down from the four-poster with his claws, chanting triumphantly, Second one! Second one! Loren yawned, reached for his wand, and waved it toward Peeves. The dormitory window slammed open, and a strong current of wind swept through, carrying Peeves out with a clatter. From outside, the clamor of thunder and wind against the castle walls mingled with the distant cracking of branches in the forbidden forest. As the cold air rushed in, Ron, Seamus, and Neville mumbled and burrowed deeper into their blankets. Loren glanced across and noticed Harry's bed was empty. Peeves's shout made sense. Harry must have been the first one up. He casually cast a locking charm on the window to keep Peeves from returning. After washing and dressing, Loren went downstairs and found Hermione already waiting on the common room sofa. This was a familiar scene. Hermione had learned to be flexible about wake-up times. If someone slept in, she'd wait a while longer. Sometimes Loren arrived earlier and waited for her. Today, Hermione's hair was loosely tied back with a twig-like tie, a few strands falling over her forehead. Her clear skin and bright smile felt like sunshine on a rainy day. Good morning, Hermione said, closing the book she'd been reading and tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Good morning, Hermione, Loren answered with a soft smile. Did you write the letter? She asked. Loren hesitated. I'm asking, did you finish the letter to Mr. Bates? Hermione repeated slowly. Her tone was soft and pleasant but carried a cool edge. Loren thought for a moment. I stayed up late waiting for Neville last night. When he finally came back, I stayed up comforting him and lost track of time. I forgot. Hermione's sigh said she'd expected that. She folded her hands together. Write it now. After breakfast, we'll go to the owlery. We'll be back in time for the Quidditch match. Loren grinned, took out paper and a quill, sank onto a stool, and began composing the letter, pausing now and then to choose his words. "Let me see what you wrote. Can I use it as a reference?" he asked. "No," Hermione snapped, a flash of embarrassed heat in her voice. Then, softer. "Fine. If not, then not. Why are you being so fierce?" Loren watched her for a moment, amused. There were still a few hours before the match, and since it was the weekend, the castle was quiet. After he finished the letter and breakfast, the two donned their waterproof cloaks and enhanced bubblehead charms, took umbrellas, and left for the owlery. Loren held his umbrella and glanced at Hermione's storage pendant, trying a ploy. "Give me the letter. I've got a thickened envelope, won't get wet in this rain." "Hanch will protect the letter," Hermione said matter-of-factly. She sounded sure. She also felt a twinge of regret at having accidentally revealed a small vulnerability. From the moment they'd finished the letter to breakfast and leaving, Loren had been trying every trick to see it. He wasn't obsessive. He'd never pried at letters before, but the more Hermione hid it, the more curious he'd become. Inside the owlery, Loren paused every few steps to stroke owls perched on shelves. He praised the tame ones, cooed at the hatchlings, and flirted with a particularly cute little owl. When he finally wandered back to Hermione, he tried again. "The match is about to start. Hand over the letter and go ahead to the stands. I'll join you after I chat with Hanch. How's that?" Hermione shook her head. She was patient, not at all rattled. Loren dawdled, dragging her along until at last they reached Hanch's perch. Hermione watched with resigned amusement as the scene of master and bird affection played out. Hanch was baffled, but no self-respecting owl refused a full-body rub and a snack. After Loren cleaned Hanch's claws for the third time, he had to give up on prying open the envelope. Hanch flew out of the owlery, carrying Hermione's letter and one of Loren's. As they left, cheers and whistles from the Quidditch pitch cut through the rain. Loren pricked up his ears and frowned. "It's your fault," he grumbled. "You made us miss the start." Hermione pursed her lips, and after a few deep breaths, let out a laugh of exasperation. "Yes, if someone hadn't stopped to greet dozens of owls and given Hanch several full-body massages before leaving, we might not have missed the beginning. Isn't that right, Mr. Morgan?" Loren chuckled. "It's fine. We can still make it." The wind and rain grew louder. On the pitch, brooms sliced through the storm. Rain and sweat streaked together on the players' faces. Students in the stands shouted encouragement hoarsely, their voices battling the weather. Lee Jordan's commentary boomed across the pitch, periodically interrupted by sharp admonitions from Professor McGonagall. Loren and Hermione worked their way down to the bottom row. Loren closed his umbrella and squinted into the sky. "Don't those dark clouds seem to be moving fast?" "Dark clouds?" Hermione followed his gaze and froze. "Those are Dementors." "Harry." A scream cut off as Dumbledore shouted an incantation. A brilliant silvery white Patronus blossomed, its light sharp as swords, cutting through rain and dark, rising like the sun from ground to sky. Harry, flying in midair, was suddenly overwhelmed by an old, terrible chill. The icy wash seemed to pour into his chest, stabbing at his insides. Memories, his parents' last night, his mother's cries, flooded him. The Dementors had come again. Harry blacked out. Gravity pulled him downward. The stands lit up as the headmaster's Patronus swept over everything. Gryffindor had lost their seeker. Cedric caught the golden snitch with ease. The Hufflepuffs who won were conflicted. Victory felt hollow. Gryffindor had led before Harry fell. Still, Cedric didn't dither. He went to Professors Sprout and McGonagall and requested a rematch for the following week. That evening, Loren and Hermione visited Harry in the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey greeted them, and when they stepped inside the ward, they found Ron and Ginny there already. With Dumbledore present, Harry hadn't suffered any lasting damage and was awake, propped against the headboard and talking to Ron. Ginny sat on the edge of the bed, quietly trying to peel an apple. The skin meant to come off in one long ribbon, but whenever Harry looked at her, her hand shook and the peel broke. Ron, licorice wand dangling from his mouth, paid no heed to hospital etiquette. "Harry, you must not become a professional Quidditch player after school," he blurted. "Why not?" Harry said, surprised. "I thought about it. Captain Wood said I'd be a good fit." "Your talent, maybe," Ron said earnestly, "but not your luck. Think how many matches you've been in since your first year. Every time there's been something that nearly killed you." Ginny's hand trembled again, and the peel snapped. She looked at Harry with a frightened expression. Quirrell's attack, Dobby's odd protection, Lockhart's incompetence, the Dementors now. Harry went through the list silently and felt Ron might have a point. "Don't listen to him," Ginny said. "If you lose your seeker because of this, Captain Wood will be heartbroken." Loren and Hermione pulled the privacy curtain aside and walked in. "Loren, Hermione," Ron greeted cheerfully. "Good evening," they replied. Ginny brightened and pulled Hermione down beside her, chattering as she kept peeling the apple. Loren sat on the other side of the bed. "Don't worry, Harry. Cedric has already asked for a rematch next week." Harry's face lit up. If he'd ruined Captain Wood's last season, he wouldn't have known how to face the captain again. "Cedric's really a good person," he exclaimed. "I hope the Dementors in the rematch turn out to be kind and chivalrous," Ron muttered, crunching his licorice. "It's the third time," Harry said through gritted teeth. "I'd love to give them a good knocking, break a few noses." But remembering how he blacked out whenever a Dementor came near, his bravado faded and frustration showed on his face. "How's your Patronus coming along? You're getting lessons from Professor Lupin every week, right?" Loren asked. "Don't ask," Harry said gloomily. "With the Boggart, I can sometimes produce light, but it's not the same. Practice duels and a real Dementor aren't alike," he shrugged. "I suggested practicing with actual Dementors, but Lupin said that's too dangerous. They're ministry employees. You can't just capture them for practice." "Practical training," Loren mused. He wondered if the Boggart he controlled could be used for something like that. Later, in the room of requirement, which was currently simulating the Slytherin Dean's office, Loren reclined in a rocking chair behind a desk. A cauldron on the desk gurgled gently. A rectangular box covered with black cloth trembled nearby. In his arms, his fantastic book glowed faintly silver. Inside the book's library, crimson flames roared and darkened at the edges, heat warping the air. Even nearby shelves not yet touched by the fire saw pages curling and blackening, quickly turning to ash. Within the conflagration, serpent-like shapes gestated, ash pythons slithering inside the inferno. Loren focused, watching flames spew from the tip of his wand. He felt the feedback through the wand and tried to coax the torrent into something smaller and thinner. Whoosh! Just as he thought he had it contained, the flames surged, roaring out of control again. He remained calm. Casually, he threw the fire-spewing wand into the blaze. The applewood wand turned to ash, and the fiend fire lost its source. When he flicked his hand, an identical wand materialized. Loren cast an invisible transfiguration over the sea of fire. Under his will, the flames curled and folded into many small, sinuous snakes. "It works!" Loren cried, delighted. But as he tried to direct the swimming snakes, the transfiguration faltered. The serpents scattered, and the fire's reach expanded. A scorching wave rolled over him. His attempt to control fiendfire had failed. Unfazed, Loren started work with counter charms and termination spells to snuff the blaze. The two forces battled for over 10 minutes. The library turned into a hell of roaring flames. Fawkes himself, no, not Fawkes, but Flamel, watched as Loren prepared to restart the library and said in an exasperated voice, "If you want to practice fiendfire, the dueling room has plenty of scenarios for burning. Why insist on burning the library?" Loren chuckled. "I find burning the library more satisfying." 3 out of 3. Loren, when I grow up, I will be you. A thin silver light flared, then dimmed. When Loren finished his fiendfire practice for the day, his consciousness slipped back from the enchanted book. He spent a few minutes checking the cauldron and adjusting the flame, then pulled back the black cloth, set a small walnut box before him, and unlatched its buckles. The box, which had trembled earlier, now lay still as if something inside held it shut. Loren breathed out, wove a false memory with practiced hands, and tightened his occlumency. He began to coax the Boggart's strange magic. The lid clicked open, and a cold, hollow chill poured out. Pale, corpse-spotted hands reached from the box, and a Dementor wrapped in its black cloak drifted free, exuding the airless, biting cold that always accompanied them. He met it with a prepared Patronus and immediately covered its face, immobilizing it. Loren shoved a large, silver-glowing bundle of fabricated memories into the creature. The wisp-like mass sank beneath the hood, and Loren felt a faint link form between himself and the Dementor. He calmed, settled into the connection, and let his mind slip in. Suddenly, his vision skewed. He seemed to look down on the top of his own head from an odd angle. The Dementor's body fed him a steady stream of cold and hunger. The false memories he had inserted radiated warmth and contentment, like a bowl of hot stew, and although a boggart could mimic a Dementor, it digested memories slowly. By Loren's estimate, this soothing food memory would sustain his control for nearly 10 minutes. Using the borrowed body, Loren drifted up and withdrew the Patronus. It was a peculiar sensation, heavy with chill and sluggish joints, but astonishingly light. Flying felt instinctive, needing no wings or thrust. He circled the ceiling, held the withered, decaying hands up to his eyes, turned them over. Pale skin gleamed faintly in candlelight. The body could be touched, yet it felt impervious, like a corpse, and not a corpse at once. Dementors, boggarts, what are they really? He murmured. The castle bell chimed the hour. Loren, forgetting the time, packed away his things and left the room of requirement. In the corridor, the torches and candelabras had been doused. Wind and rain still lashed at the outer walls, and the stone passageway carried dark, eerie echoes. It was a perfect night for something dreadful. Loren smiled. It's the weekend. No classes tomorrow, he thought, and I'm doing this to help Harry. A few minutes later, a damp piece of parchment had been folded into the shape of a paper crane. Loren cast a waterproofing charm on it and steered it, wobbling, toward the hospital wing. Late at night, in the Hogwarts hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey had put the lights out hours before. The ward lay in darkness, its air redolent with detergent and healing herbs, a smell oddly comforting. Harry, however, could not sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, eyes wide, replaying the day's events. Those Dementors had ruined everything. The animagus ritual had collapsed. The Hogsmeade visit had been spoiled. He should have asked Madame Pomfrey for a sleeping draught. Instead, he sat up, took his wand, conjured a few blue flames, and began to sort through the gifts left by friends. Neville's sweets. Put them away. Seamus's fruit. Eat it tomorrow. He tucked a pair of Weasley biscuits into his storage space. He remembered Hermione's book, Today's Transfiguration, which she'd left as something to occupy him. He smiled faintly at the thought that Hermione, and perhaps no one else, would willingly read a textbook for pleasure. He pulled out a greeting card. As soon as he opened it, a shrill, elf-like voice burst out of the paper. Harry Potter! Get well soon! Defeat the Dementors! Win the Quidditch Cup! The sound made his scalp prickle. He slammed the card shut and pressed the heavy Transfiguration book on top of it to muffle the enchantment. That's Fred and George for you, he muttered. Then a paper crane fluttered in from behind the curtain and landed before him. He unfolded it. The note inside had been written in wet ink. That room on the 4th floor corridor. Come quickly. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the ink hadn't dried. Who had written it? It couldn't be a Death Eater. Voldemort was far away, and the Dementors kept the school secure. It could be a prank. Fred and George, maybe Loren, even Malfoy and his lot. Harry's mind darkly ticked through the list of people who might enjoy making him look foolish. After a while, he decided to take the chance. He pulled the invisibility cloak from his storage, slid it around himself, and set off. On the other side of the castle, Loren had closed the walnut box and drifted briskly to the old 4th floor door. Alohomora, he whispered. The door protested with a creak and swung inward. Dust drifted in the milky light from his wand. Cobwebs clung to the corners and a stale animal odor lingered, the remnant of Fluffy. The trapdoor in the floor yawned open to darkness that any light he sent was unable to pierce. Tendrils of Devil's Snare tangled the opening in a tight weave. Loren circled the small room, thinking of how to give Harry a memorable fright, and a sudden, amused suspicion tickled him. This felt exactly like something Dumbledore would contrive. Meanwhile, under the cloak, Harry moved along the dark corridor. He passed Lupin's office, lights still on. The girls' lavatory echoed with splashes. Thunder rolled above, rain battered the battlements, and somewhere in the Forbidden Forest branches cracked. The old 4th floor door stood slightly ajar. Harry remembered seeing Fluffy here in his first year, remembered Dumbledore catching him the second time, and even the terrifying first meeting with Voldemort in that vicinity. He pushed the door open. The room inside was black and smelled faintly of breath. Before he could decide whether to cast light, The door behind him slammed shut with a heavy bang. A chill, like icy fingers, reached for him, and beyond the cloak's thin weave, Harry sensed movement. He ripped the cloak off, leveled his wand, and flung blue fire into the darkness. A Dementor hovered above the trapdoor, wrapped head to foot in black. Its face was hidden beneath the hood, but where its eyes might be glowed, a cold green light that felt like knives. The air around it soured, and a nausea like ice knifed into Harry's chest. He began to shake, breath shallow. He caught sight of the faint outline of the figure controlling the Dementor, and an odd recognition. The control had something tentative in it. Loren, guiding the creature, froze when he saw the effect on Harry. He hadn't expected Harry to be this vulnerable. Hastily, Loren eased some of the Dementor's power. He didn't want to send Harry back to the hospital wing unconscious. Harry swallowed and forced himself to remember Lupin's lessons. He dredged for happy memories, low-voiced, expecto patronum. A silvery steam burst from his wand, bright and cloud-like, and pushed back the immediate cold. For a moment, relief bloomed, but the chill surged again, thicker and heavier, constricting his Patronus. The two lights met and strained. The cold grew more oppressive. Harry's breath became visible as frost. Panic tugged at him, and the Dementor's presence brought back other images in a rush. The crude lock on the fourth-floor door, the trapdoor he now stood over, the harsh marks left on the castle stones by past battles. Memories of lying in the hospital wing with his friends hung together in a single fragile thread. He forced a smile against his own terror, felt his mouth twist and his heart pound, and shouted, "Expecto Patronum!" A brighter, more dazzling band of silver light burst from Harry's wand than before, coalescing into an animal of shimmering silver, flecks of light orbiting it and dispelling the cold that had filled the room. In that brilliant silver glow, the creature reared, lowered its head, and silently trotted away from Harry's side. Loren, still linked to the Dementor's body, watched as the four-hooved creature with antlers charged straight toward him. He was about to pull the boggart free and exit the Dementor's form when the body changed unexpectedly. An invisible ripple ran from the Dementor's head over its whole form. Its old stiffness, sluggishness, and chill ebbed, and the ice-cold Dementor magic dissipated. In its place, the gray, misty magic of a boggart filled the air. The boggart reverted to its original form, and Loren felt the strange feedback from its body. The Patronus's silver flow lost its hold, and the boggart's magic drifted through the room. As that gray mist brushed Harry and seeped into his mind, the boggart's nature did something extraordinary. Loren couldn't read Harry's memories, but fear itself transmitted miraculously clear impressions. Images that had once terrified Harry, Lord Voldemort, Professor Quirrell, Acromantula, Basilisk, were painted before Loren's inner eye. It felt as if, with a single fleeting thought, the boggart could give those fears shape. Loren didn't know exactly what it meant, and he didn't act rashly. He guided the boggart back into the walnut chest in the corner and eased his consciousness out of the Dementor's body, returning to his own under the trapdoor. Harry watched the Dementor slide back into the darkness until it was gone. The silver Patronus turned and padded back toward Harry, antlers gleaming, eyes large and luminous. "Prongs," Harry whispered, reaching out to touch the silver beast's forehead. The stag dispersed into sparks of light that floated away. A stag. What a beautiful Patronus. Loren lifted the trapdoor and emerged, dusting his robes, then walked to the corner and picked up the walnut chest with composed deliberation. Harry, wide-eyed and still dazed, watched him and asked blankly, "Loren, why are you here?" Loren clapped a hand to Harry's shoulder and answered earnestly, "I thought you might be lonely in the ward, so I wrote and invited you over to see something fun." Harry opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, as if a dozen things crowded on his tongue. Before he could decide what to say, Loren moved to the door and waved. "It's late, Harry. Go back to the ward and get some sleep." He stepped out and closed the wooden door behind him. Footsteps clattered down the corridor, someone running fast. A few minutes later, Harry, having gathered himself, turned toward the door, fists clenching until his knuckles cracked. Loren Morgan. Late that night, in the library of the Fantastic Book, a furious sea of fiendfire roared and rolled, waves of flame surging and carrying hellish beasts across the fire. The blaze spread in every direction, but strangely avoided one open space entirely. Flamel's eye twitched. He seemed equal parts amazed and exasperated. The method for steering Fiendfire's spread had been discovered by Loren. Why it always seemed to happen in Flamel's library was another matter. Loren stood before the towering inferno and clicked his tongue in admiration. It's a shame Transfiguration's effect on Fiendfire doesn't last longer. You've already found the basic form of the control, Flemel said, waving a hand to reset the library's scene and settling into a comfortable seat. You can refine it over time. When I was manipulating the Dementor, Loren began, and then finished telling Flamel exactly what had happened, how the Dementor had shifted, the boggart magic had spread like gray mist, and how fear images had flashed into him. He scratched his head. It's odd, but I don't see how it's very useful. The things the boggart showed besides the Dementor were all empty shells. They can't do anything. Perhaps it will prove useful in another way, Flamel mused, eyes deep with thought. After a pause, he sent Loren out of the book. Watching the spot where Loren's consciousness vanished, Flamel sighed softly. Even if it seemed useless now, the experience had let Loren touch raw emotion itself, the embodiment of fear. Nicholas, you have the gift of prophecy. Have you seen his rate of growth in your visions? The next day at lunchtime, the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall rang with the merry, childish rivalry of George and Fred. Burp. Burp. One burp sharp and crisp, the other long and musical. Both brothers declared victory, exchanged smug looks, and laughed until they doubled over. After recovering, they picked at their glasses of juice, trying to coax another melodious exhalation from the bubbles rising in their stomachs. Fred noticed Harry, newly discharged from the hospital wing, meticulously placing a small stack of biscuits on a clean plate and drizzling ketchup on the side. The biscuits were tiny, familiar. "Harry, aren't those the biscuits we gave you?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you really going to eat them with ketchup?" "I'm not going to eat them," Harry replied. George, mid-burp, couldn't help himself and demanded indignantly, "Why not?" "Because you gave them to me." That was answer enough. The twins looked at each other and burst into conspiratorial laughter. After another fit of giggles, George asked, "Then what are you doing with them?" Harry didn't answer immediately. He wiped the stray sauce off the plate and then his mouth, forcing a bright smile as he stood up with the plate. The twins followed him, grinning. "Loren, these are to thank you for helping me learn the Patronus charm. These biscuits are my thank you gift." Loren glanced at Harry's forced smile and then at the plate. The biscuits smelled faintly of potion, odd and off. After a beat, Loren shook his head slowly. "I don't eat biscuits." "Just try one," Harry insisted, pushing the plate forward. Hermione, Ginny, Ron, and Neville all craned their necks to see. "I don't like ketchup," Loren said flatly. "They're lovely even without it. Just take one." Loren looked at him, unflinching, and then said plainly, "George and Fred gave these to you yesterday. I saw it." Harry's smile froze. "Drat it," he muttered, mock-peeved, and sat back down, pout returning. The twins dissolved into laughter. "What's going on?" Ron asked, wandering over to watch his brothers torment someone else. Harry prodded a fried sausage and began to recount the previous night. Gifts arriving, the prankvelope that would chirp non-stop if you took a big bite, someone trying to set him up to anger Madame Pomfrey and force him to drink a bitter potion. Ginny groaned into her empty plate, wishing she hadn't trusted Luna's idea and sent such a ridiculous card. At least it hadn't been signed. Percy, finally fed up by the twins' antics, chased George and Fred through the Great Hall a few minutes later, tongue lolling and face fierce. Brother against brother, the younger students watched and laughed. A heavy rain fell for 2 days straight and only began to clear in the pre-dawn hours of Monday, leaving the sky washed and keen. Monday was noisy and busy. After breakfast, many students received invitations to join the Potions Club and cheered. Professor McGonagall used Transfiguration that morning to hold recruitment exams. 2 class periods, one for the club and one for animagus candidates. After the exams, the students relaxed. Even the beasts in Defense Against the Dark Arts were easier to look at. As Lavender Brown put it, even when they're baring their teeth, they look rather cute. She paid for the comment by almost being hoisted on the classroom chandelier by a squirmy creature. After class, Lupin asked Loren and the others to stay and help tidy the messy room. "I heard about the match, Harry. Are you all right?" he asked, slipping his books into his briefcase. Harry, stacking chairs, slapped the table in mock exasperation and then grinned. "I only got a few scrapes, Professor, and I learned the Patronus. Look," he drew his wand and shouted, "Expecto Patronum." A silver stream spilled from his wand like a trickling brook and gathered into a silvery white stag. "A stag, too," Lupin murmured, momentarily lost in a memory. Loren and Hermione studied the stag, comparing it with their own Patronuses. Hermione's face showed a little unease. She knew the stag was a normal size for a Patronus, but having seen Loren's and Dumbledore's immense Patronuses, she felt a small sting of comparison. Ron peered enviously. If the stag had a physical body, he joked, he'd probably try to pick it up and carry it off. "Professor, why did the Dementors break into the school?" Harry asked. "Weren't they supposed to patrol outside Hogwarts?" "They were hungry," Lupin said, coming back to the present and speaking calmly. "Dumbledore has not allowed them within the school for a long time. Their usual source of prey dried up, and they haven't eaten in ages. The excitement and emotion around the Quidditch pitch was a temptation they couldn't resist. They thought it a feast." "But I was the only one who turned into their little biscuit," Harry declared indignantly. "Don't let me face them again." "It won't happen," Lupin smiled. After the incident at the pitch, Dumbledore was furious. Both the Ministry and the Dementors were taught a lesson. Harry grumbled, still eager for a scrap. Lupin turned to Loren. "Loren, could that method you used to help Harry practice the Patronus work on others?" Loren thought for a beat and shook his head. "It was just a stimulus. The important thing was that Harry was already ready. He was familiar enough with the Patronus charm. Even without me, he could have summoned it soon." Lupin accepted that answer with a little sigh of disappointment, as if he had hoped for something more. Professor McGonagall posted the Transfiguration results on Wednesday. Most of the third years passed. Gryffindor students screamed and spilled out of the castle toward herbology, trampling wet grass on the way. Today's lesson is on processing mature bubble-headed pods. Professor Sprout announced in her earth-toned gardening clothes, eyeing the students warily. "And remember, if you're learning animagus work, stay away from the mandrakes. I don't want anyone pulling one out incorrectly." The students promised, though their bright eyes made Sprout nervous. After she dismissed them into groups, the Hufflepuff prefect stood guard around the mandrake beds and did not budge. Harry circled with a wooden bucket, looking for an opening to get a mandrake leaf, but couldn't find one. He returned to his friends and asked, disappointed, "Loren, do you have any extra mandrake leaves?" "No," Loren said. He and Hermione hadn't plucked many at the start of term either. Neville leaned in and whispered, "You can buy them in Diagon Alley. They're a hassle to grow, so sometimes Mum buys them. My mandrake leaf came from her. But I'm staying for the Christmas holidays, so I won't have a chance to go to Diagon Alley. I can buy it for you and have an owl deliver it." "That's great." "Oh, Loren, Hermione, are you staying at Hogwarts for the holidays?" "No, we're going home." The younger students chattered on, talking about animagus work, the upcoming break, and everything in between, with the easy, giddy confidence of pupils who had too much time and too few worries. The third greenhouse was heavy with warm, humid air. The sense of compost and damp soil and the faint tang of fermentation hung about. They picked plump pink pods from the bubble-headed plants and shelled shiny, popping beans. Occasionally a bean would drop to the floor, and an overripe one would burst with a sharp, cracker-like snap. In the stands of the Quidditch pitch, Hermione sat between her roommates Parvati and Lavender, who stared at Cedric with wide, rapt eyes and wouldn't look away for a moment. Cedric's requested rematch had gone ahead as planned. Gryffindor's strength showed. Hufflepuff had garnered more supporters from the other houses because of it. Parvati tried to keep her voice down, but couldn't hide her excitement. "Cedric's so handsome, he's like a valiant knight." Lavender made a heart with her hands. "And a tragic knight. It's so moving." "Hey," Hermione tugged Lavender's sleeve and whispered, "Ron's sitting right in front. He can hear you." "Oh, Merlin." Lavender sat up straighter and tried to look composed. Parvati grinned. "Actually, Captain Wood's very handsome too, isn't he?" "Haha, yes." "Oh." Lavender cut off, glanced at Ron in the front row, and added demurely, I mean, all our players are handsome. Parvati was speechless for a beat. Loren arrived late with a box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and eased in beside Hermione, trying to avoid the most excited spectators. Lavender and Parvati leaned in, whispered a little, giggled, then linked hands and moved to other seats. Hermione took 2 or 3 beans from Loren's box, popped them in her mouth, and smiled as the sweetness spread. Luckily, they were all strawberry. I thought you liked Quidditch. Why are you late? Hermione asked. When did I ever like Quidditch? Loren shrugged. You even volunteered to commentate in your first year. That was for fun, he said with mock dignity. Hermione studied him and decided he enjoyed the people watching more than the game itself. There won't be any Dementors today, right? No, weather's fine. Dementors can't get in. Good luck, Harry, Hermione murmured. Their easy conversation was drowned by the roar as the match began. Angelina Johnson scores. A beautiful shot. Gryffindor, 10 points. Lee Jordan called, his voice fiery and excitable, and the Gryffindor stands erupted. Another goal. Angelina, my queen. Lee Jordan's heart will always belong to you. A nearby McGonagall chided him mildly, but Lee laughed and returned to his commentary. Spinnet's got the quaffle. Wood blocks it. Oh, look at that goal! Hufflepuff, apart from Cedric, simply couldn't match Gryffindor. Yet because Cedric had asked for the rematch himself, the crowd cheered his efforts all the more. The match ended without incident. No storms, no Dementors, and both teams swooped down at the end to salute in the center of the pitch. George and Fred, as if on cue, put their hands on Cedric's shoulders and ribbed him. Thanks, Cedric, even if your brain isn't the sharpest. But we'll admit you're an upright Hufflepuff. Cedric gave a wry, helpless smile and pushed their hands away. Last week should have been ours. We're still getting used to each other. Our training isn't as tight as yours. Fred grinned wider. Why don't you join Gryffindor then? Fred! Wood stepped in, a look of mock severity, and steered the twins aside. The 2 captains spoke in a low, serious tone and arranged a few practice matches. Then it was the 2 Seekers' turn, Cedric and Harry. Cedric clapped a friendly hand on Harry's shoulder. That stop and climb you did was brilliant, Harry. You're the most talented Seeker here in years. Thanks. Harry scratched his head, shy with the compliment. Cedric had a way about him that made even opponents respect him. That feeling lasted only a few minutes. After the match, Harry watched Cedric jog to the side of the pitch and fling himself into Cho Chang's arms. They whispered, and Cho comforted him, her expression gentle, a small, composed smile on her lips. Harry's face crumpled. For a moment he looked as if he'd been stunned by a jinx, pained and bewildered. He turned toward the Weasley twins. Cedric, Cho Chang, there. Oh, you mean that, said casually from a little way off. Cho Chang's the Ravenclaw Seeker, Cedric's Hufflepuff. Looks like they've been seeing each other since practice. Since practice? Harry stared, as if the words were a blow. He'd been practicing hard, too. Why hadn't it been him? George added with relish. I want to see what happens when they meet on the field. Will Cedric go all out? Angelina piped up from nearby. Maybe Cho Chang's even better. Who knows? Ha-ha! Will she go easy on him then? Someone taunted. The stands erupted in teasing and laughter. Slytherins shouted over. The twins hurled barbs back. Ron talked loudly about the tryouts. The ordinary joys and grievances of the crowd felt distant and somehow unbearably loud to Harry. For the next few days he drifted, distracted and absent-minded. He ate mechanically, walked like a sleepwalker, his expression drained as if a Dementor had left a mark. The next day brought the tryouts for reserve keeper for Gryffindor. Loren wasn't there and later didn't learn the details until Ron came home seething. He collapsed onto the sofa and fumed. That Cormac McLaggen did it on purpose. He stopped exactly the same number of quaffles as I did, no more, no less. He paced and puffed, then glared at Harry. Why aren't you saying anything? You don't think he's more suitable than me to be keeper, do you? Whose side are you on? Harry, still distracted, blinked and finally spoke with a complicated look. Actually, George and Fred went easy on you. That's why your score matched McLaggen's. What? Ron's face fell. Angelina suggested it, Harry continued. She saw you were nervous and thought McLaggen didn't fit well with the team's style, so she convinced Wood to make both of you reserves for now and decide after he graduates. That's awful. My mandrake leaf got chewed up for nothing, Ron muttered. With the Quidditch business settled, the long-awaited Animagus class finally began. Later that afternoon, Loren and Hermione walked into Transfiguration, pamphlets from last term tucked under their arms. The room was packed. Seamus, Dean, Draco, Rolf, Luna, Ginny, and many others squeezed into the familiar desks. Whether McGonagall had lowered the bar or word about Animagus had spread like wildfire, the class size had tripled, and the room felt nearly too small. Harry and Ron borrowed Loren's pamphlet and flipped through it, marveling at the transformations described. The first step, holding a mandrake leaf in your mouth, isn't hard. It just takes patience, Neville explained quietly to a new student, Hannah, whose golden pigtails bobbed as she read. Hannah peered at the pamphlet. Could someone's animagus be a plant, like a poisonous tentacle? Generally, no. Animagi become animals, Neville said. But poisonous tentacles move, right? Neville hesitated. But poisonous tentacles have magic, and an animagus won't turn into something magical. Like a Patronus? Yes. Hannah bit her lip. But I heard Headmaster Dumbledore's Patronus is a phoenix. Neville went a little pink and had no answer. Hannah giggled and said, "Should we ask Professor McGonagall?" Neville's sigh was almost resigned. At that moment, the bell rang. Professor McGonagall set her lesson plan down and smiled at the class. Good afternoon, children. As you've likely heard, Animagus is a complex branch of Transfiguration. It requires thorough human transfiguration knowledge and a long, precise ritual. You've already shown a solid grounding by passing Transfiguration exams. This course will deepen that knowledge. George raised his hand. Professor, do those of us who already know this have to sit through it again? That's up to you, McGonagall said. Many of you have already learned the basics. This introduction is mainly for newcomers. I suggest you listen again, but I know some of you are preparing for OULs and NEUTs, so attendance isn't mandatory. Loren nudged Hermione. Want to listen again? She nodded, soft and earnest. Loren felt a twinge of reluctance. He'd already learned most of it and would rather be anywhere else, but he kept quiet. McGonagall continued. The rest comes down to experience in human transfiguration and control of one's mind. New members may formally begin the ritual after the Christmas holidays. Until then, you may make limited attempts and practice. There are 2 more full moons before Christmas. If the weather permits, I will bring everyone to observe last year's animagi preparing their potion on those nights. She paused. Now, a brief introduction to the origin of animagus and a few documented cases where human transfiguration lost control. Those who have heard this can leave afterward. A hush fell. Many of the 5th and 7th years stood and filed out. Loren began to rise too, but Hermione slipped her hand under the table and took his. Her left hand was small and warm, and her fingers found his with a quiet, obvious plea. Loren looked at her. Her ears were a little pink, and her attention was buried in her notebook, pretending the hand wasn't there. Loren grinned inwardly, squeezed her palm, and laced his fingers with hers, holding on. The lecture might be dull, but Hermione's hand was entertaining. Loren glanced out the window. Clouds drifted across the blue sky like cotton, a cool breeze moving softly, as if the world were a calm painting. The professors must have held a meeting and agreed on something, because club activities around the school started to become far more frequent. Professor Flitwick's Charms Club met every Tuesday, guiding younger students through basic spellcasting, correcting bad habits, offering little tips, and even teaching some of the less formal charms, the Trip Jinx, the Leg Locker Curse, the Bat Bogey Hex. The younger students loved it, though they would have loved it more if Flitwick hadn't kept reminding them that wand work in the corridors was forbidden and that anyone caught would get detention. The upper year charm sessions were more advanced. Based on everyday charm work, Flitwick led the older students into a flexible but deep exploration of older magics. Explore was really just Flitwick sharing his own research in a way the students could grasp. Seamus was particularly eager for those classes, especially because of the rumor surrounding an improved exploding charm Flitwick had been working on. The Potions Club changed, too. Professor Snape had apparently come to some sort of understanding with Professor McGonagall. Twice as many new members had been recruited this year. Almost every student in advanced potions had been invited, and several younger students with strong potion grades had received invitations as well. Harry, however, slumped onto the common room sofa, looking thoroughly dejected, as if a severing charm had left him a withered old man. Ron glanced at him and then at Loren, puzzled. "You guys just got back from potions. Why's Harry like this? Was it hard work, or did Snape use him to test something?" No." Loren shook his head deliberately. "The older students showed the new ones how to brew Dittany essence. We're pretty practiced at it, so it wasn't tiring." Hermione stared at Harry with concern. "Are you all right? Are you sick?" "Yep, not tiring at all." Harry raised a hand weakly and let it fall. His face said it all. There were things he couldn't easily admit aloud. Cho Chang had joined the Potions Club as a new member, and Cedric had been standing there teaching her how to brew Dittany essence, hands close together, guiding her through the steps. Loren and Hermione had been tugging in the other direction, oblivious. Harry wanted, briefly and irrationally, to shove them all into a cauldron and boil them down to Dittany essence. He brightened somewhat and looked at Loren. "Can I drop out of the Potions Club? I don't think I have any talent for potions." "You could try," Loren said easily, spreading his hands, "if you don't mind the consequences." "What consequences?" Ron crossed and patted Harry on the shoulder. "From now on, Snape's going to watch every potions meeting like a hawk. You might be turned into a test subject at any moment." "Oh no." Harry covered his face and imagined bleak days ahead. His gloom didn't last long. Time pressed on into late November, and this Saturday there was a Quidditch match, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. The weather was raw and windy, but dry, perfect for flying. The team came out of the changing rooms after receiving school brooms for the match. Captain Oliver Wood and the team's invincible seeker, Harry Potter, led the players to the pitch. "Nimbus 2000! Time to fly!" Fred cheered. George waved his broom and added, "Those Ravenclaw bookworms won't know what hit them. They won't even see my backside." "Honestly, George, nobody wants to see your backside." "Oh, Angelina, you've got me wrong. I'm Fred." "Don't try to fool me, George. I can tell you two apart." George squinted, sensing something odd and falling into thought. Wood smiled at his teammates' bickering. They were confident. Wood's expression suggested no arrogance, only the certainty of a team that practiced hard and knew what it could do. He noticed Harry looked distracted and patted his shoulder. "You're a veteran seeker, Harry? Still nervous?" "A little," Harry admitted. Wood's eyes crinkled. "Don't worry. Dodge the bludgers and leave the rest to us." Wood remembered his own first match, knocked unconscious by a bludger 2 minutes in. The memory gave the warning more weight than a casual remark. Outside, the stands erupted. The cheers hit them like waves that made the team robes flare. The Gryffindor robes, fiery red outside, gleaming gold inside, set their faces aflame with color. The Ravenclaw team entered opposite them. Harry's gaze snagged on Cho Chang walking toward the right side of the pitch. She looked elegant and reserved in Ravenclaw blue-gray. Despicable Cedric, Harry thought. He'd told himself he'd moved on, but seeing Cho made his chest tighten. How could Cho like Cedric? Because they practiced together? Because he was a Hufflepuff seeker? Because Cedric's skill on a broom was impressive? Harry's grip tightened on his broom. He swore, silently and fiercely, that he would prove his superiority to Cho here and now. His eyes sharpened like a lion's. "Ladies and gentlemen," Loren began, voice booming, then hurried the rest. "The timid cows who were scared witless by Gryffindor, the disheartened ones defeated by us just 2 weeks ago, the pathetic opponents about to be defeated again, and the Gryffindors about to retain their championship. Hello!" The roar died as if on command. The crowd gaped at the commentary booth. Even the Gryffindor supporters paused. Lee Jordan, who usually shared the booth, stared at Loren in stunned admiration. He had thought he'd caught up to Loren's level after 2 years of practice, but clearly he hadn't. Professor McGonagall was livid. The head of Gryffindor marched to the booth and hauled Loren off. "Stay here. Don't anywhere near the commentary box again." "As you command, Professor," Loren said in mock deference and obeyed. Lee Jordan recovered and stammered his way back into the match. "Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hogwarts' second Quidditch match of the season. Today's match is Gryffindor versus the Ravenclaw team." Parvati collapsed against Lavender, shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles. "Loren, he's just too much," Lavender gasped. Hermione looked exasperated. She knew Loren couldn't be left alone near a microphone. Meanwhile, Loren's rousing words had clearly fired up Ravenclaw. Their captain and chaser, Roger Davies, wore a grim face through the pre-match formalities. Their beaters, Jason Samuels and Duncan Ingleby, glowered at Harry like they wanted to crack him with every bludger. Cho passed Harry with a hard look, and his heart hammered. She's looking at me, Harry thought. He resolved to show off his best flying in front of Cho, to defeat Ravenclaw utterly, to let her see his skill, and then to console her, perhaps even suggest they practice together. He stopped himself. That would be slipping into being the third wheel. Fine, he decided. He'd think about consolation later, after Cho and Cedric had broken up. Couldn't she see Cedric wasn't for her? Clarifying that seemed unnecessary now. He had a match to win. Madame Hooch's whistle blew, and Harry shot into the sky like a struck rocket. In the end, Gryffindor won decisively. Harry's flying was a cascade of dazzling moves that left Ravenclaw's seeker reeling. He showed off so much that Cho was visibly stunned, but the result was not what Harry had pictured. After the final whistle, Cho's eyes were red. With a face full of grievance, she ran into Cedric's arms and clung to him. Harry stood frozen, a hollow ache opening inside him. The third Saturday in November, in the evening, Loren knocked on the door of Professor Lupin's Defense Against the Dark Arts office. "Good evening, Professor Lupin." Loren held up a tightly sealed crystal vial and smiled. Lupin, reading the Daily Prophet, shook his head and put it aside. He gestured for Loren to sit and poured him a cup of tea. "From the past few months' experience, tonight probably won't be great," he said lightly. Loren explained that the plan had been to brew corpse-scented arum, but Snape had reduced the concentration. He handed Lupin the crystal bottle. Lupin put it away with the wolfsbane, and, with his curiosity piqued, Loren read the center photo on the front page of the Prophet, a bearded middle-aged man waving beside a stiff-looking fudge whose hand had been left hanging mid-offer. The headline read, "The Ambition of the American Magical Congress. The International Confederation of Wizards Focus Shifts." Loren kept glancing at the picture and finally asked, "Professor, does the Ministry have any new moves recently?" Lupin pushed the paper over to him. "They moved the ICC conference to New York," he said. "That man in the photo is Samuel G. Ku Hogue, an American Magical Congress official. That photo's from his handover in Devon." Loren scanned the article. It was mostly the same, the Prophet turning the story into yet another angle for commentary and speculation. Lupin mused, "Sk. Publishing this photo, the Ministry let that happen. They've given Fudge a vulnerable image. Politicians do that on purpose." He trailed off, then in a quieter tone added, almost to himself, "I heard the American Magical Congress is using werewolf migration as an opportunity. They want to establish officially recognized werewolf communities, recruit werewolves as aurors even, using their abilities against dark wizards. They've pushed it to a significant scale. It's, well, unbelievable." Loren sipped his tea and listened. Lupin seemed melancholic tonight, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd wandered a long way and carried more than he showed. "Dumbledore told me there might be a conspiracy in this," Lupin began, then stopped, as if realizing he'd been confiding too far to a student. He pursed his lips and fell silent for a moment. "Who knows? Sorry, Loren, for unloading that." Loren said nothing, simply raised the teacup to his lips and thought about the way the world beyond Hogwarts seemed to be shifting. Barely able to muster the energy to see Loren to the door, Lupin sat back down in his chair. Under the dim candlelight, the moving pictures in the paper blurred into flickering gray-white blocks. The Werewolf Code of Conduct had been promulgated in 1637. According to the code, werewolves had to sign a pledge not to attack others and to lock themselves away every month. They were required to stay away from markets and villages for several days around the full moon. On paper, the regulations were not harsh. Werewolves were only required to voluntarily register with the Ministry of Magic and to try to follow the rules. A few werewolves believed that rhetoric and did register, naming themselves and describing their condition. The consequences, however, were unexpected. The ministry published the lists. Market vendors began refusing to sell certain items to listed werewolves: black bread, fresh vegetables and fruit, dry firewood and coal. Tavern staff resisted serving them. If a werewolf sat at the bar, even a half-drunk patron would move away, leaving a clearing. Unexplained incidents were pinned on werewolves: a missing calf, a child fallen down a chimney, theft, robbery, murder. Suddenly, werewolves became prime suspects in every unsolved case. After a while, the code became a dead letter. No one wanted to register anymore. Governments began to restrict werewolves' movements, hoping they would slowly die out. Instead, the numbers didn't fall. They rose until werewolves were a force no one could ignore. Lupin was not worried for himself. Dumbledore's assurances and Loren's help, and the occasional use of the Philosopher's Stone, let him keep his condition under control, but he knew that treatment could help only a few. His decades of wandering had taught him to notice the changes in the werewolf community and the conspiracies rippling beneath them. He lost track of how long he sat there. After the clock on the wall chimed the hour, Lupin stood, straightened the desk, tucked the wolfsbane potion into his robes, and headed for the hospital wing. Half an hour before lights out, Loren came out of the Defense Against the Dark Arts office in the company of Sir Cadogan and his gray pony, all the way to the entrance of Gryffindor Tower. From there he saw Harry sitting by the portrait hole, hands cupping his head, staring into space and letting out an occasional melancholy sigh. The fat lady in her pink silk leaned against the frame and lectured, "Honestly, child, there's nothing to be sad about at your age. You've got decades ahead to taste fine wine, enjoy warm sunshine and gentle breezes." She clasped her hands and began to sing. Harry sighed deeply. "You'll understand when you reach my age." The fat lady's song trailed off, and she retreated behind the stone. Loren trotted up and crouched beside Harry. Following his gaze, he asked lightly, "What's up? Why is the undefeated seeker Harry Potter out here catching a chill instead of celebrating inside?" Harry stayed motionless, his expression flat, and said with a philosopher's gravity, "Someone like you would never understand." "It's not legitimacy," Loren teased. "It's a clumency." When Harry flushed, Loren laughed. "Just kidding. You actually believed that?" Harry was stunned, then sighed and lowered his head as if finished with talking. Loren propped himself on his hands, eyes narrowing up at the corridor ceiling. "Harry, have you ever stopped to ask yourself if you really like Cho Chang?" "Of course," Harry answered immediately, a little too quickly, as if to convince himself. "What do you mean? What do I like about her?" "You," Loren began, and Harry froze. He opened his mouth and found he could not answer. Loren's voice dropped so low it barely carried down the corridor. "You and Cho met on the Quidditch pitch." "Well, met isn't quite right. You learned her name from others. Cho might be aware of you because you're Harry Potter, the boy who lived, and because you're the youngest invincible seeker that everyone at Hogwarts knows about. You and Cho have exchanged a word or two. You don't know her habits, her personality, what flavor of pudding she likes. In short, you decided you liked her quickly, without thinking about what exactly it is you like." He turned to Harry. "Do you like her looks?" Harry thought, then nodded, then shook his head. "Yes," he admitted. Loren smiled. "Cho is pretty, yes, but there are girls at Hogwarts prettier than her. Do you like her identity?" "Identity?" Harry looked confused. "What identity? Asian, Ravenclaw, Seeker, labels, that kind of thing." Harry fell silent, then looked at Loren with even more confusion. He neither nodded nor shook his head. Loren prodded him. "See, you don't know her personality. You don't like her for her looks. You don't like her for those identities. So what is it that you like?" Inside the common room, the Gryffindors were celebrating the day's victories. Beating Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw meant that if they beat Slytherin too, the House Cup would be theirs. Filibuster fireworks from Hogsmeade popped and sputtered, filling the air with crackles and colored smoke. Candies rained down like confetti. After the cream cake was cut, Fred and George launched the first attack, smearing cream into faces with glee until Wood and Percy, decorated in confectionery, finally protested and the rumpus died down. The fireworks kept popping, but the revelry gradually returned to a manageable level. "Hermione, have you seen Harry and Loren?" Lee Jordan, his face still streaked with cream, found Hermione reading in a quiet corner, excitement written on his face. "Your commentary was brilliant today. I have to pick his brain. He could teach me how to do commentary like that for Slytherin next term." Hermione hesitated. Professor McGonagall's banned Loren from the commentary box. You should probably not try to copy his style. Lee grinned conspiratorially. Oh, you don't understand. If I could do one match like Loren, I'd be a legend here forever. Hermione wisely did not try to dissuade him. Loren went out. I don't know when he'll be back. You should look for him tomorrow. A pity, Lee said, and wandered off, cream on his face making him look ridiculous against his dark skin. Hermione closed her book and checked the clock. Loren should be back soon. She wanted to ask about Professor Lupin, privately, not in the middle of a crowd. She decided to wait by the portrait hole. Pushing through the celebrating Gryffindors, she reached the exit and was just about to slip into the portrait tunnel when she saw a figure curled in the shadows behind the stone door. The common room inside was loud and bright. In the shadowed recess behind the portrait hole, a small girl had folded herself up, away from the light. Tear streaks on the floor showed she had been crying not long ago. Hermione felt awkward at discovering such a private moment and at first moved to leave, but then stayed. The girl wore a slightly too thick autumn robe, red and gold stripes on the sleeves. She must have rushed in from outside without changing. Her hair was fiery red, her face classically pretty, still with a little baby fat at her chin and a scattering of freckles, fewer than her brother's, but unmistakably Weasley. Hermione thought very few girls at the school were prettier. Ginny Weasley, cheerful and generous, the sort who would make lots of friends, now sat curled and downcast. Hermione crouched and put a hand on Ginny's shoulder to comfort her. As she reached to say something, a familiar voice carried from outside. Then what is it that you like? Ginny, head buried in her arms, lifted her face. Her brown eyes glittered in the shadow. Inside the portrait hole, Loren was laying out the same argument. Harry's sudden realization hung in the corridor. When forced to ask himself what he actually liked about Cho, he could not answer. Her appearance, her demeanor, her identity, all of those things appealed to him, yet none of them seemed the real reason. Loren put an arm around Harry and patted his shoulder. You don't know her yet, he said quietly. You don't actually like her now. You're attracted to a collection of qualities you've noticed all at once. If you get to know her, really get to know her, you might fall in love for real. But it won't be now. Harry blinked. What qualities? Things you can see at a glance, Loren said. Pretty, likes Quidditch, a seeker, good grades, visual things. Harry felt his gloom lift a little as he thought about Loren's words. He complained half-heartedly. Hearing you say that, I sound shallow. Not sound, you are, Loren said, clapping him on the shoulder with a laugh. If there were a girl your age, very pretty, brilliant at school, and by chance loved Quidditch and was a seeker too, wouldn't you be inclined to like her? Harry thought hard, and to his own shame found the idea appealing. He went quiet. Loren nudged him and grinned, teasing. Harry flushed from neck to ears and managed a murmured, Ginny, listening in the shadows, brightened until her eyes shone like candles on a cake. She grabbed Hermione's hand, her cheeks pink. Teased by his roommate, Harry straightened and shot back. What about you? What do you like about Hermione? Elementary schooler, Loren began with mock disdain, then softened, propping himself up on his hands and gazing at the torchlight. I like everything about Hermione Granger. Her beautiful eyes, those slightly prominent front teeth, her intelligence, her stubbornness, that exasperating personality. He went on in a tone of mock triumph that sounded somehow sincere. In it was a small, lovely joy that made other people want to share it. Feelings don't form after a few meetings or a few words. They grow as you walk a path together, not a long path, necessarily, and before you know it, they've arrived. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. Loren bumped the dazed Harry, and once he gave the fat lady the password, they slipped back into the common room. Loren spotted Ginny reading by the fire and sat beside Hermione, glancing at the book's cover. Still on Transfiguration today? You must have that issue memorized by now. Hermione was silent. Why aren't you saying anything? Loren looked at her. Why's your face red? Lavender and Parvati attack you with cream. No, Hermione said softly. The fire's too fierce. It's a bit hot. Hot? Is it? It doesn't look hot to me. The flames in the hearth swirled crimson and bright, throwing warmth that seemed to bask the whole room. The crackle of the logs and the gentle heat rolled outward, and Hermione said again, very softly, It is hot. Here I sincerely recommend a book by a certain Hermione fan leader. Updates regularly, plenty of content. Endorsed by veteran readers, quality guaranteed. Especially reassuring is the identity of the Hermione fan leader. 338. Dim and suddenly bright, heavy, cottony clouds cloaked the Quidditch pitch. A cold wind from the forbidden forest sliced through the gaps in their robes, making everyone shiver. All right, warm up with 20 laps, then we'll split for scrimmage, Oliver Wood barked, blowing his whistle. The 7 starters and 2 substitute keepers shot into the air on a variety of brooms, streaking around the pitch. After the warm-up, they divided into 2 practice groups. One group had substitute keeper Ron Weasley, beater Fred Weasley, and chaser Katie Bell. The other had Cormac McLaggen, beater George Weasley, and Alicia Spinnet. Angelina Johnson hovered as a floater, helping both sides with passing. Starting keeper Oliver Wood on his firebolt worked seeker drills against Harry. Wood and Ron had agreed to rotate keeper duties, so this was a quick warm-up routine. Brooms cut the air, scarlet robes trailing behind as Quidditch training kicked into gear. A glint of gold flashed and was gone. The snitch. Wood, riding his firebolt, accelerated at once. Harry's breathing was a little ragged, but he didn't panic. He knew the firebolt's speed and that his Nimbus 2000 couldn't keep up. Calmly recalling the snitch's last direction, Harry accelerated toward the stands as though he'd just spotted it there. Wood, relying on his seeker instincts, followed. Just as both prepared to sweep into the stands, Harry suddenly veered and shot off in a different direction. Wood couldn't change course in time and slammed into the stand's drapery, tumbling down amid the curtains. Fortunately, the ground around the pitch was soft, and the curtains cushioned the fall. Wood was unhurt and quickly remounted his broom. Harry, already back in the air with the snitch gripped in his hand, grinned at him. Wood ticked Harry with the tail of his broom. A variation of the Lansky feint? Seeker Harry Potter. I'll say this, even Joseph Lansky himself wouldn't have done it better. Harry couldn't help grinning, pleased with himself. They were about to carry on when an angry voice rose from the other end of the pitch. You're doing that on purpose. I know you are. Cormac McLaggen was broad-shouldered and bulky. Even standing still, he looked as if he could cover all 3 hoops. He was shouting, red-faced. Those 2 beaters and that fellow are brothers. They're passing to him on purpose. Fred and George hovered near the hoops with faint, amused smiles. McLaggen got angrier at their smirks. See? You admit it. You pass to that little Weasley, but when it's my turn, you make it difficult. Enough, Wood zipped over on his firebolt. McLaggen apologized to George and Fred. Captain Wood, you should have seen it. McLaggen protested self-righteously. That Weasley's blocking way more than he did at the tryouts. If they weren't cheating, I'll eat a pound of flobberworm eggs. Ron's grin, earned by his excellent blocking, faded. He stared blankly at his brothers, uncertain whether he'd done it by skill or if they'd been letting the passes through. The Weasley twins, still wearing lazy smiles, ignored McLaggen's outburst and circled on their brooms. I said apologize, Wood repeated sternly. Oh, fine, sorry, McLaggen muttered, making a perfunctory apology. Wood's frown deepened. Cormac McLaggen, if you can't fully trust your teammates on the field, you can leave the team now. Veins twitched in McLaggen's temples. For a moment, Harry expected a scene, but McLaggen shot an ugly look at Ron, spat words into the air, then flew back to the keeper position as if conceding. Wood turned to Ron with the same serious look. This is for you too, Ron. On the pitch, you must trust your teammates completely. I do trust them, Ron mumbled, ducking his head to look at Fred and George. It's me I don't trust. Were you really covering me just now? Angelina swooped over and tapped his head. What are you on about? Even if those 2 were looking out for you, the rest of us were too. Relief washed over Ron's face, and he relaxed. The twins swooped by, giving him a mock bump each. Don't worry, little Ronnie, they grinned. We'd be devastated if you didn't make the cut. I won't fail, Ron shouted indignantly. When Wood graduates, I'll be team captain, and I'll train you 2 properly. Everyone burst out laughing, some nearly losing their balance on their brooms. Only Wood's expression stayed sober. After a few more jibes, they swung back into training. A moment later, another red-haired Weasley rose from the ground on a battered training broom called the Shooting Star. Her broom wobbled and was slow, but she flew up all the same. Captain Wood, I want to try out for Seeker. Ginny's voice reached them before her did. Her face shone with a wide, eager smile like a small sun. From the window seat outside the library, they could see the pitch where players in deep red robes swooped about. 4 red-haired Weasleys were easy to spot among them. A light brown-haired boy walked over with a mock-serious face and addressed someone in a low voice. Mr. Morgan, Loren's expression turned solemn. Yes, Mr. Finnigan? I have information about potions, but I can't verify it, so I came to you. It concerns the future of the Empire, sir. I beg you. Seamus declaimed dramatically. For the Empire it is an honor, Loren said, digging through completed homework to find his potions essay and solemnly handing it over. Seamus took it in mock gratitude. The Empire will not forget your contribution. Glory will remember your name, Loren Morgan. All for the Empire. Goodbye, goodbye. Hermione watched their exaggerated postures and theatrical accents and muttered as Seamus left, It's just copying homework. You two turn it into an epic. Hey, how can you say that, Miss Granger? Loren said earnestly. Everything is for the glory of the Empire. Hermione fell silent for a moment, then bent back over her ancient runes homework. Loren wasn't done. Miss Granger, the Empire needs to requisition your astronomy homework. He was already rifling through his stack of assignments, hoping to salvage a few lines from Hermione's long essay to satisfy Professor Sinistra. How did I get it so easily? He murmured, then frowned and looked at Hermione in confusion. Hermione rolled her eyes. Is something wrong? Am I really the kind of person who expects you to do all your homework for me? No, aren't you? Loren said, taken aback. Hermione ground her teeth, drew a deep breath, and snatched her essay back. Yes, I am. You must properly write this one about Pluto yourself. Loren scratched his head in bewilderment. November 28th, Sunday. Between sunset and moonrise, a fine, thread-like rain drifted around the castle. In the dim light, the rain was almost invisible, but if you held out your hand, the threads would patter against your sleeve and wrist, cool and faint. The night sky was a pure black, waiting for the full moon to rise and paint the world with its pale glow. The students queued behind Professor McGonagall and walked, at varying paces, toward the edge of the forbidden forest. Professor Lupin escorted them. These were students in the Animagus class. A few who had completed the mandrake leaf ritual were to bury the secret potion tonight. More had come simply to observe and learn. They had no umbrellas and relied on their cloaks and warm spirits to fend off the chill, chatting as they went. Ginny, I didn't know you flew that well. From a seeker's point of view, you fly better than Wood, Harry exclaimed. Ginny's cheeks flushed, though the dark hid the color. Thanks, she stammered. It had been a week since she'd insisted on joining the team. With Angelina and the twins' persuasion, Wood had surprisingly kept her on for observation. Wood had found time to coach the substitute keepers and let Harry run basic seeker practice with her. Harry had painstakingly explained Quidditch rules, things a seeker must watch for, and basic tactics. In 2 weeks, she'd made marked progress, at least in Harry's opinion. Fred swooped up grinning. Go on, Ginny. When you replace Harry as Seeker, Gryffindor will have 4 Weasleys, the Weasley team. You're right, Fred, George chimed in, but the biggest problem is the Keeper. Don't you agree, little Ronnie? No, George. The 4th Weasley I meant is Charlie, Ron snapped, offended. You too, Ron growled, offended enough to charge forward, howling. The twins skimmed around Percy, laughing. Percy's temples throbbed. He had a feeling his mandrake leaf was about to suffer. At the back of the line, Professor Lupin watched the laughter and chasing with a gentle smile. Professor, how are you feeling now? Hermione asked worriedly, concerned he might transform in front of everyone. I feel fairly good, Lupin replied. My mind is clear. Don't worry, Hermione. The moon hasn't shown itself yet. If you could keep your wits after transforming, Professor Lupin, you could pass as an animagus for teaching demonstrations, Loren mused. Lupin smiled and shook his head at the absurdity. Professor, when Harry's father and his friends learned to be animagi, did you study with them? Hermione asked. Yes, Lupin said. They borrowed many of my ideas on maintaining rationality and balancing the beastly impulses. Animagus, werewolf, rationality. Cold rain ran down from the black sky and settled in Loren's mind like a passing thought he couldn't quite grasp. Suddenly, he brightened. "Then why didn't you learn to be an animagus, Professor?" he asked excitedly. Lupin's laugh was tinged with wryness. "Have you forgotten? Werewolves can't stay rational during the full moon, and they can't even complete the first step of the animagus ritual." He trailed off, and Loren leaned in, lowering his voice, though in Lupin's ears it sounded magnified, as if by a sonorous effect. "You've noticed it too, sir. The magic of the full moon triggers something strange in a werewolf. But what if werewolves were transformed into animals without magic on full moon nights?" Hermione's mind raced, and she picked up the thread. Animagi have no magic in their animal forms. If there were no magic present in the body, in theory, the beast wouldn't be triggered by the moon. Compared to the constant need for expensive wolfsbane and the difficulty of mastering the homorphous charm, this would be a much cheaper solution. Lupin said nothing at first. Excitement flushed his face, and his lips began to tremble. The tremor spread through him like a rising wave of heat that even the cold rain couldn't dampen. The full moon hadn't yet broken through the clouds, but a faint light had begun to glow along the path ahead. They walked across the damp grass in a loose cluster. Hermione's voice was low. "Remus, do you think, if werewolves really can learn to become animagi, would they repeal the anti-werewolf laws?" "Who knows? Maybe." Remus Lupin's reply was half-muttered as his hard-soled shoes crushed the wild grass. No one noticed the faint rustle. Hermione caught the unspoken note in his answer and fell quiet. The moon had slipped out from behind the clouds, and the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of the forest. Ron trailed behind with Fred and George, their laughter carrying across the night. The younger students kept their distance, content to watch the small excitement. To avoid any conflict, Harry and Ginny dropped back, walking with Remus and Hermione. Hermione and Ginny met eyes for a moment, an unspoken exchange, and then both looked away as if nothing had happened. "Where's Professor Lupin? Wasn't he just here?" Harry asked, scanning the group. "He had to leave early for something," Remus answered. "That's odd. Only realized he had somewhere to be after we'd gone so far from the castle," Hermione said. "Very odd." A murmur ran through the group, and Professor McGonagall led them out to a stretch of grass at the edge of the forbidden forest. Those holding mandrake leaves between their teeth edged forward, and Remus and Hermione fell to the front right. Professor McGonagall faced the students, her gaze flicking along the line until it landed on two familiar faces. "Percy Weasley and Cedric Diggory?" "Here." "Professor, I'm here." Percy and Cedric pushed forward. "You two, stand up front and demonstrate for the others." McGonagall's tone was brisk. "Everyone who is burying the potion tonight, pay attention. If you have questions, ask them. St. Mungo's archives record hundreds of injuries caused by animagus ritual mistakes. 17 of those were caused by errors in potion brewing and led to irreversible transfiguration failures." The easy chatter died away. Even the younger students breathed a little more carefully, afraid to miss anything. McGonagall stepped to the side to let Percy and Cedric take center stage. "First, remove the mandrake leaves from your mouths." Both boys produced small crystal phials and spit the leaves into them. Cedric was quick and neat. Percy hesitated, embarrassed by the act. McGonagall snapped at him. "Mr. Weasley, if you don't want to transform only your upper half or only your lower half, spit more and leave about half a knuckle's worth of space in the bottle." The girls in the crowd tittered. Hermione's lips tightened. George shot Fred a look, and Fred smiled as if he had a joke on the tip of his tongue. Then Angelina nudged him, and he clamped his mouth shut. Percy, caught by McGonagall's eye, blushed and resigned himself to the procedure. Under McGonagall's careful instruction, Percy and Cedric added a strand of hair, a silver teaspoon of dew, and a death's head hawkmoth pupa to their fields. "Finally, check that the stoppers are secure," McGonagall warned. "There's no need to specially shake the mixture. The potion will change of its own accord with time. Now go find a quiet, dark place to hide it. I recommend burying it under tree roots or in a hollow where no small animals live." Percy and Cedric ran off in opposite directions into the forbidden forest to conceal their potions. McGonagall spoke a few more cautions about brewing and then sent the others to prepare. Hermione brought her own crystal bottle to her lips and then stopped. She met the prying look from Remus with a cool, flat stare. What are you staring at? Remus blinked. Make your potion. Hermione ignored his teasing. Holding the phial with one hand and shielding it with the other, she finished filling it, unfazed by the small sk-sk noises he made. The mandrake leaf had done its job. The saliva in the bottle had no sickly smell. After she added the dew, it looked almost clear. The hair curled gently around the pupa inside the crystal bottle. Together, Remus and Hermione dug a deep pit beneath an enormous beech tree, scattered insect-repellent powder, placed the bottle in the earth, refilled and flattened the soil, and scratched a small mark on the tree trunk so they could find it again. On the walk back to the castle, they passed the humping willow. Hermione lingered, watching its leaves, deepening to red, and whispered under her breath, "I hope Professor Lupin has everything go smoothly." At that very moment, Remus Lupin was somewhere very far from the school. He had already transformed and stood by a window on the second floor of the shrieking shack, staring up at the moon. A steaming roasted chicken leg hung forgotten in his storage pouch. The wolf's sight was keen, but the moon looked different now, hazy, slightly out of focus at the edges, its color colder. Lupin had never seen the moon so clearly from that angle in years. The wolfsbane potion seemed to be keeping him lucid. He felt no exhaustion. Slowly, thoughts he had been turning over for years gathered themselves into a dangerous, heady clarity. If werewolves could be helped to control themselves, if animagus training could be used to restore self-control and reduce the harm caused by transformations, then maybe, he thought, the prejudice and suffering might be addressed in a new way. Voices from his life. Goblins at Gringotts, homeless years on the road, the stray comments of fellow werewolves and pitying wizards slid into new meaning. In the wolf's ears, those voices became a chorus of possibilities. Before dawn, while the last of the moonlight faded, Lupin scrambled out of the tunnel and ran full tilt to the headmaster's office. The portraits along the way were roused by the pounding on the stair. Headmasters who had not been disturbed in their sleep broke into chorus of complaints. Dumbledore emerged from behind his office screen, beard in disarray, his sharp blue eyes bright behind his spectacles. For a moment, the old man's irritation at being woken vanished, replaced by a small, chastened look. "Professor Dumbledore, last night Remus made a monumental discovery," Lupin blurted as soon as he could. Dumbledore only said, "It's you, Remus. Come in and tell me." The reproach and regret melted away from his face. He sat at his desk, banged the teapot, and poured 2 cups of a maple-sweet drink. Lupin could hardly sit still. He spilled out everything that had happened and every thought that had followed. Then he waited for Dumbledore's judgment. Dumbledore was slow to answer. He lifted his cup, drank, and smiled a little when Lupin tasted the sweetness and frowned. "When I was small," he said at last, "my mother always said that when you have no time for breakfast, something sweet makes you feel much better." Lupin's panic softened into the dawning, absurd realization that the headmaster had done it to take care of him, followed by Dumbledore's mischievous wink. The smile vanished. "Regarding your idea, using animagus training to counter werewolf transformation, though I taught transfiguration once, we should consult a specialist." He spoke calmly. "Minerva, would you come to my office at once? I want your help." A silver phoenix Patronus sprang from his wand and flew off. Dumbledore looked at Lupin and asked lightly, "Would you like biscuits with that?" A few minutes later, Professor McGonagall arrived, hair from the day already at her temples, and listened carefully while Lupin explained the hypothesis. Dumbledore, steady as ever, then raised another matter. "Our agent Beetle reports she infiltrated a werewolf community and noticed a professor from Ilvermorny visiting frequently. Each time he returns with a generous supply of food and winter clothing. She asked whether we should investigate. I refused because the person is abroad." "Whatever you know who plans," McGonagall said, analyzing, "he wishes to make werewolves his pawns. If Remus's idea can be realized, we could bring many werewolves to our side, no matter what they are plotting." Lupin, calmer now after more than half a cup of syrup, weighed the practicalities. Supporting werewolves to learn animagus, even with wolfsbane to keep them lucid, would require substantial funding. With Cornelius Fudge as minister, I doubt the ministry would allocate that kind of money. McGonagall and Dumbledore exchanged a look. McGonagall's lips twitched as if she were saving a small smile. Remus, you've only just begun teaching here. Perhaps you don't yet know Hogwarts resources. If the problem is simply one of potions, we can bypass the ministry. Lupin's thoughts reeled at the idea that Hogwarts had suddenly become wealthy. He pictured hidden founders' vaults and half-heard legends of treasure. McGonagall waved the notion away. Right now, the main question is whether werewolves can learn animagus at all, and how difficult it will be to teach them. Lupin cleared his head and replied earnestly. Professor McGonagall, I read some of your papers in today's Transfiguration. You argued that the difficulty of animagus lies in mastering the process of human transfiguration, using reason to fight bestiality. Believe me, those things are very familiar to a sane werewolf. McGonagall considered him, then said, Then you must prove it to Albus and me. I will tell the students you are an assistant to the class. You will study with them, memorize with them, and undergo my assessments alongside them. Lupin stood stunned. Dumbledore sipped his maple drink and watched the two of them with an amused, indulgent smile, clearly entertained by how events were unfolding. 3:40, before the holiday. December was a month of endless drizzle. Not constant, but 2 or 3 hours of that irritating fine rain every day and night. The damp settled over the castle, the old wooden cupboards began to smell faintly musty, and even Peeves's usual racket from inside them dwindled. The little wizards hadn't run freely across the grass for days, and a restless itch seemed to be under everyone's skin. Loren and the others, having finally removed the mandrake leaves from their mouths, began pointing wands at their chests and chanting the animagus spell every morning and evening. The steady drizzle made everyone jumpy. One clap of thunder at the wrong moment could ruin a potion before it finished brewing. Wednesday afternoon was animagus class. Hurry, hurry, we'll only get the back row if we don't move. Who told you to get so absorbed in your book you lost track of time? Rith, don't blame me. Shouldn't you have reminded me? I was sleeping. How was I supposed to remind you? Loren said self-righteously. Shh, let's go in, Hermione said, a magazine and notebook balanced in one hand while she tugged Loren's sleeve with the other, hustling him into Transfiguration. As Hermione had feared, the front rows were already taken by early arrivals, so they ended up at the back on the right. Hermione greeted Lupin politely beside her. Good afternoon, Professor Lupin. Good afternoon, he replied. Loren grinned. Lupin assisting again? Lupin smiled helplessly. Before either of them could tease any further, Professor McGonagall began the lesson. Loren's eyes drooped as he watched her on the podium. It was all material they'd already covered, and it felt dull. Loren really hadn't wanted to be in class. To accommodate the newly joined students, McGonagall was reviewing old material, and for Loren that made the lesson tedious. Besides, she liked to call on people to answer questions, and she was likely to pick someone familiar, so he couldn't just lie down and sleep. Lupin's smile looked forced and a little complicated. He hadn't expected that nearly 20 years after graduating, he'd once again be a student of McGonagall's, only now with a different set of classmates. Though McGonagall called him an assistant for animagus class, Loren and Hermione had guessed his real purpose from the first session, which explained the commotion before class started. Lupin glanced at Loren, yawning beside him, then at his own full notebook, and felt even more complicated. After half the class drifted by, it was nearly time for McGonagall to ask questions again. Loren tried to stifle another yawn. McGonagall tapped the blackboard. We have now finished the correspondence between the human torso and that of the transformed animal. Can anyone tell me the corresponding relationships between a bird's torso, a quadruped's torso, and a human's? Neville and Percy answered the bird and quadruped comparisons in turn. McGonagall praised them, then scanned the class with a sharp look and asked if anyone could describe the correspondence for fish. Loren glanced to his left. A little witch nearby had her hand raised high, her fair face eager. She looked like she wanted to leap out of her chair. McGonagall's gaze swept the room and lingered on the usual few hands. Then it fell on Loren. His face tightened. He cursed his luck inwardly, bracing to be called on. Instead, McGonagall's eyes shifted to Lupin. Since no one has answered, Professor Lupin, please review the correspondence between fish and the human torso for everyone. Lupin felt like he'd been put back under a professor's thumb. Strange, not unpleasant, and oddly nostalgic. He cleared his throat and, keeping his expression composed, explained, "Very well, Professor. The key point with fish transfiguration is the limbs. Compared to the obvious correspondences in other forms, fish are more subtle. The fins correspond to the arms and the tail." Fortunately, there were no more questions for the rest of class, and Loren slept through the remainder. Afterward, before dinner, some students stayed behind to finish homework. Professor Lupin left with Professor McGonagall. Loren, Harry, and Ron finished faster than Hermione. Loren peered at Hermione's work over her shoulder and, after a moment's thought, asked, "What homework is that?" "Ancient runes," Hermione said without looking up. "Ancient runes," Loren started. Bang! Without looking up, Hermione jabbed Loren with an elbow. The world went quiet. Loren rubbed his arm and muttered, "If you didn't want to tell me, you could have just said so. Why hit me?" Harry ignored them and asked Ron, "Are you going home for Christmas?" "Not sure. Mum and Dad are going back, and Percy, George, and Fred have decided to go home, so I probably should." Ron saw Harry's face fall. After thinking a moment, Ron threw an arm around Harry's shoulders. "But I can't stand spending the whole holiday with Percy, so I'm staying." Harry brightened immediately, gratitude in his eyes. He knew Ron was staying to keep him company. Hermione paused mid-quill, looked up, and asked, "What about Ginny? Is she going home?" "Of course," Ron said loudly. "If Ginny stayed, Mum and Dad would come to school for Christmas." Meanwhile, after discussing animagus material with McGonagall, Lupin returned to his office. He'd barely settled when an unexpected knock sounded. "Professor Snape?" Lupin opened the door, surprised. "What brings you by?" Snape's mouth twisted into a faint, mocking smile. "As a colleague, wouldn't you invite me in? Or do you prefer to discuss matters at the doorway?" "My apologies, Professor Snape. I was surprised and impolite," Lupin said, stepping aside and motioning him in. He brewed tea with the new leaves he'd bought and poured a cup. "So, Professor Snape, what can I do for you?" Snape sniffed the tea and set the cup down to cool. "I hear you've resumed classes at Hogwarts. How is transfer student Lupin finding it? Are you keeping up with the teaching?" "Thank you for your concern. I'm fine. After all, I was a Gryffindor prefect once," Lupin answered, sitting behind his desk and taking a sip of the tea. "Professor McGonagall is considerate. She wouldn't make things unnecessarily hard for students. Don't you agree?" Snape's expression soured at the implication, and he sneered, "I don't care how you fare in class. I've come to inform you I will be brewing this month's Wolfsbane potion." Lupin froze and then asked, instinctively, "What about Loren?" Snape's smile widened with triumph. "He's going home for Christmas. More importantly, you're about to begin your animagus ritual at the full moon this month. To ensure the Wolfsbane potion's effects don't interfere with the mandrake, I will tailor and refine the Wolfsbane potion for you." Lupin sipped his tea and forced a composed reply. "Very well, thank you, Professor Snape." "Don't worry," Snape said with a brightness that made Lupin inwardly regret having hinted anything earlier. "Loren's previous potion reactions are all recorded with me. Rafflesia, Leopard Lily, Corpse Flower Arum. I'll make sure this month's Wolfsbane potion meets your needs." Time moved on, and before they knew it, it was the week before the holidays. One night a cold wind rose. The Homping Willow shed every leaf and stood bare. Morning brought a bright, startling sky. The gloomy month of rain had broken, and the sky was a dazzling eggshell white. Loren, groggy, fumbled under his blanket for his wand, chanted the animagus words. Amato, animo, animato, animagus. Felt for a second heartbeat beside his own, and not finding it, knew the ritual had completed. Fully awake now, he padded to the window in his slippers and cracked it open. The cold wind gusted in. The muddy ground outside was dusted with a thin, sparkling frost that caught the light. "It's starting to snow," Loren murmured. He threw the window wide, and the cold rushed in. Harry and the others squealed and buried themselves under their covers, blaming Loren from beneath the blankets. Loren went around tugging their covers off. "Get up! Don't forget! We're going to Hogsmeade today." 10 minutes later in the common room, Hermione watched a gaggle of boys barreling down the stairs, pressing cold hands to each other's necks. Loren pushed through and stood in front of Hermione, eyes fixed on her slender, pale throat. Hermione, knowing exactly what he was thinking, rolled her eyes, pulled a Gryffindor scarf from her bag, and wrapped it around her neck. Loren pouted, but slipped his hand inside the scarf and soon felt the warmth. In the Great Hall, they found the castle decked with Christmas decorations. Professor Flitwick had strung up colorful fairy lights that, when touched with a wand, turned into tiny fairies flitting about with sparkling wings. After breakfast, wrapped in scarves and cloaks, the little wizards followed Professor McGonagall out toward Hogsmeade. Last night's snow had glazed the road with a thin sheet of ice, and the students delighted in speeding along it, then stopping and sliding a little more, laughing when someone lost their balance. In Hogsmeade, Harry squinted at the bright ribbons lining the street and exclaimed, "Great! Those useless Dementors are gone. Finally, cleared out." "You've learned the Patronus charm already. Why are you fussing about Dementors?" Loren asked, shifting his hand in Hermione's scarf to get warmer. "Just because I can handle them doesn't mean I want to see them," Harry grumbled. "It's cold enough." Hermione stopped and tugged on their sleeves to draw attention to a notice posted at Honeyduke's entrance. Loren leaned his head on Hermione's shoulder and, with Harry and Ron, read it. By order of the Ministry of Magic, customers please note, unless otherwise notified, Dementors will patrol the streets of Hogsmeade, Diagon Alley, and Nocturne Alley after sunset every day. This measure is to protect the safety of residents in these areas and will only be lifted once Bellatrix Lestrange has been apprehended. Therefore, all customers in the aforementioned areas are requested to complete their shopping before sunset. Merry Christmas. "I'll bet you," Ron exploded. "They only put Dementors around Hogsmeade as an excuse to watch over Hogwarts. That miserable Minister of Magic isn't protecting Hogsmeade, he's spying." "The Dementors are the real problem here," Harry agreed. They grumbled at the notice for a while, then followed the scent of sweets into Honeyduke's. Blocks of creamy nougat, glinting coconut ice, neatly arranged chocolates, and all manner of magical confections, exploding bonbons, pepper imps, fizzing whizbees, and Drooble's best blowing gum. With no mandrake leaf restrictions, Loren and his friends filled their pockets and bellies, even buying boxes to take home. Harry and Ron bought a few boxes too, intending to save them for Christmas. The cold kept them from lingering over shopping, so soon they all agreed to head to the Three Broomsticks for something hot to drink.